Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in for another live edition of Kevin's Biblical Discussions. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoy the content on the channel, I'm glad to see everyone that showed up so far. Got brother Kelvy. What's up, brother? Is this still happening? Yeah, CJ. As soon as yeah. And actually, CJ, I'm kind of glad that you're here. Um, so I got this book donated to me from a friend of mine called Incompatibilism's Allure, and I was actually going to probably go through one of the chapters here, and I was thinking about actually reviewing one of your compatibilism videos just to get a grasp of some of the biblical passages that people use to support this theory. But if you're actually here and willing to actually just talk and lay it out instead of me just watching your video, that'd probably be better. So if you're available to join me, CJ, you're welcome to come on. And yo, what's up, AD? Good to see you, my man. Um, The XP, yeah, I have no idea what the XP thing is. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Sure, he says. All right. Let me give you the StreamYard link, CJ. There's the StreamYard link. Now, mind you, this book, Compatibilism's Allure, I have not read it yet, but I do plan on reading the entire thing before the debate, just to get a grasp of both perspectives and see what some of the popular arguments are against it and things like that. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing tonight, guys. If this isn't for you, then you're not forced to watch. But anyone that wants to be here, I appreciate your support. So it's just a preparation night. Just going to be going over compatibilism, some of the texts they use to support this theory, problems with the theory, things in the Bible that seem to contradict compatibilism, all that. So as everyone knows, I do have a debate on compatibilism coming up on Standing for Truth's channel on September 8th against Turretin Fan. I'm also supposed to be debating Nicholas, proclaimer of Messiah, on this topic too, but we haven't come to a definite date or resolution. He said he's still working on preparing. So I don't know. So if this debate ends up happening first, I guess that'll help out Nicholas, right? He can see like the angles I'm going to come at to attack it and things. So determined to watch. Good to see you. Well, I don't want to put your real name out there. I know it, but thanks for being here, Redeemed. Oh, CJ, it says you're not connected there, buddy. It says device is not connected. I can't add you. Don't know what's wrong there. Okay. So this book's called Incompatibilism's Allure. And CJ, if you can hear me, I can't add you. It says you need to connect your mic before I can add you to the stream. So I don't know what's wrong there. Try leaving and coming back. All right. Incompatibilism's Allure by, and I'm not even going to attempt to say this person's name. There it is. It's a wild name. I don't know if that's Indian or what, but yeah. So anyway, we're gonna go down to, I think it's page 29. I want to start. Yeah. Here it is. The consequence argument. Okay, there you go. Hello, CJ. How are you, brother?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
Not too shabby. I had a very busy day today. I had a lot of stuff going on. I was doing errands and things for my mother. Took her cat to the vet. He's got a thyroid problem. He's old. I think he's turning 17 this year. Yeah, he's lost a lot of weight. He's got thin, so they put him on medicine. I took him over to the vet for to get blood work done and stuff, and I was helping my other family members out with certain things, and yeah, so it was a pretty busy day today.
Yeah, I feel that actually. We just actually yesterday lost my wife's hedgehog. Real cool dude. Yeah, he actually he hung out in my office because we didn't really have anywhere else to put him, considering the other animals. But really cool dude, and obviously very sad, but at the same time, I am, they're supposed to live between 3 and 5 years.
Mm.
He was
Oh, that's a
already
shit, man.
2 when we got him, and he lived 5 years with us. So that was pretty cool. He was like 7 or 8 years old.
Okay, so he actually lived longer than the average life expectancy for a hedgehog then.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's cool.
that's we're pretty happy about that part at least. But
Yeah, yeah.
it always sucks to lose a pet.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I remember when I was a kid, from the age of, how old was I? Like 10 or 11, up until I graduated high school. I think my senior year of high school, around there. We had this cat. Her name was Coco. She was a black and white. She was a tuxedo cat. You know what a tuxedo cat is?
Yeah,
Yeah, and she had like the little white patterns on her paws, and on her nose to her mouth connected, it was white, and the rest was all black. She was a sweet cat. I had her my entire childhood. She passed away like my senior year of high school. It was so weird with her not being there because she's been there for my entire childhood, you know.
right.
And you get attached to animals that, you look at them like a part of the family, Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So I feel that.
Not that it's. I won't go into that too far, just because it's not the topic. But one of
Yeah.
my favorite topics in Scripture has always been uh, animals and God's feelings on the animals and stuff like that. Because it seems like He's got and it makes sense, right? God is love. Got a good
Yeah.
deal of care for uh, the other critters, So I've always thought that was really cool. But anyway, I won't go too into that.
No, that's cool. I appreciate that. Oh, and one more thing before we get into the actual topic of tonight's stream. Um, the 24th of this month, I'm actually going to be going in to have a surgery done on my hand. On my left hand, I have if you notice, I got this bandage. Um, I have, I forget the scientific term for it, but I have a special kind of cyst that grows out from the joint. And it's actually gotten so big that it's actually burst through the skin and
Ooh,
it's popped out. It's like a huge lump that's coming out of my joint on my finger. I can't make a fist on this hand because it's so big. But I'm going to be going in to have it surgically removed on the 24th. So if people can keep me in prayer that goes well, and I'd appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely. I didn't actually know that was a thing, but hope that it all goes
Yeah.
well.
So there's a technical term for it, and I forget what it's called. But what happens is, so around each joint, right? Anywhere you have a joint, there's a fluid that the body produces around the joint to lubricate it.
Right.
And for whatever reason, my ring finger on my left hand, the fluid for some reason is pushing itself out from the joint upwards toward the surface, and it caused a huge bubble to make. It's a cyst, and so now I got this huge sack of skin, and it's just filled with all this fluid. And like I've accidentally cut it a few times, it bleeds, and it's like this gel substance comes out of it. And I accidentally actually got it ripped off, and it grew back and it got bigger. It's the weirdest thing, man. So I don't know how they're gonna get rid of it, but goodness gracious, it's annoying. It's a pain in the neck because I have to be really careful because like they told me that I gotta be careful not to get it cut or burst it open because I run a risk of getting infected, and I run a risk of the joint itself getting an infection, which is dangerous because this goes right to the joint. That's where it's coming from, and so I have to be really careful. Um, so it's not cool, man, and it's hindering my ability at the gym, because I can't really grip the bar that good with this hand. So it's limiting like the type of exercises I can do, which is also really annoying because I've been doing really good. I'm down about 25 pounds in the last 2 months.
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah, and so I don't want to, because this has been a thing for like 3 months now, but it's gotten so big to the point where I can't grip the bar. And so it's a big hindrance.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah,
will definitely be in prayer for that. Actually, that's a very unfortunate turn of events. I'm definitely glad it's not something more serious. The first thing I always
yeah,
start to think of when people have lumps on their skin is like the worst. So,
yeah.
not
My
that
sister
that's
said that too. She was like, "Oh, Kevin, you need to go get that checked immediately. That could be like cancer or something." And I went and saw the dermatologist, and he didn't put it like, he didn't take samples or anything. He's like, "Oh no, but that's and then the scientific term cyst, you know,
hmm
it I'm okay. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I was actually just going to go briefly through this, what they call the consequence argument. No, I don't know what this is. Like I said, I haven't read this book yet. But I was going to go over this consequence argument, see what's going on here, and then, well, since you're here, CJ, maybe I don't want to waste your time with this. Maybe I'll just do this after you leave. I don't know. Like, what do you, in your opinion, like, what are like your top, let's say, 2 passages that you like to go to demonstrate compatibilism from the Bible, and then maybe I can just check that out.
Yeah. So if I had to choose 2, that would be. I guess I'd have to think about that for a minute to narrow it down. So let me first just very quickly, if I may, just kind of give a little working definition, just so people know why I choose, because I think I do know where I'd go with it. But
Okay.
Simpliciter compatibilism just means you don't think that determinism and free will are mutually exclusive. So technically, you can be a compatibilist and not a determinist, because you're not saying determinism is true. You're just saying, oh, I just don't see a contradiction. But for sake of argument or sake of simplicity, almost every compatibilist you've ever met is a determinist, because that's part of the reason why, right?
Well, can I say something? I think that, okay, so if that's the definition people take for compatibilism, I think it's a useless definition, because it's not actually telling me anything. Like, when you ask someone, are you actually a compatibilist, or are you just saying these things are hypothetically possible? And if someone's like, oh, no, well, actually, I believe everything is determined and humans are still morally responsible and free for their decisions. Okay, so you're not just taking the position that this is hypothetically possible. You're actually taking the position that this is how reality works. So I think that just saying, well, it's not a positive affirmation. I'm just saying, I think that's just a useless definition.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. To be honest, the only reason I specify these days is because I know some indeterminists who are compatibilists. Like, if you're familiar with David Paulman, I believe he is I know he's an Arminian, but I believe he also adheres to some sort of a compatibilistic meta-ethic, or metaphysic rather. And I guess the appeal for those guys is like, it does kind of force them to argue in such a way that you're demonstrating a indeterminate free will rather than just simply a free will. Because part of the problem we tend to get in with these is somebody will be like, yeah, like Leighton does this all the time. No disrespect to Leighton Flowers, but see, this proves free will. And it's like, right, but I affirm free will. So you have to do a little bit of more of an extra step of either demonstrating that my version of free will is incoherent, or else demonstrating that your version of free will is strictly indeterministic and also true. And so I can see the appeal, but I tend to agree with you where it's like, if compatibilism, soft determinism, we can use them as interchangeable, because that's what most people actually mean when they're having the conversation is,
right,
I'm a determinist and I also believe in free will. So then there's the working definition.
Using that other definition also it causes confusion. Like when I had John Myers on, was it a year ago already now, I think, or a little over a year ago, Sharpening Iron podcast, John.
Yeah, I remember that video, actually. I can't believe is that really a year ago?
I think it was, man. I think it was over a year, actually. Yeah.
Wild.
And just trying to get him to own up to him believing things are determined and people have, a moral responsibility and free will was like pulling teeth. I'm like, wait, so you are a compatibilist, right? And he's like, well, yeah. I was like, okay. So then if I can demonstrate that determinism is not true, then the theory falls apart. And it's like, well, no, brother, because I'm not saying that this is a positive affirmation. I'm just saying that these two things are possible. And I was dumbfounded. I'm like, but wait a minute, don't you believe all things are determined? He's like, yeah.
Well, and as a quick tip, if you ever get in a situation like that again, and to be fair, you usually won't, because most people, like I said, we all use compatibilism in a more colloquial sense than the philosophical literature does to mean soft determinism. But if you ever get in that situation again, just switch your vernacular and start saying soft determinism. And now you have no place to run, because that is explicitly compatibilistic determinism. And I know that's annoying. I even find it annoying. But it creates a lack of possibility of running there, right?
See, and CJ, I don't see the difference between soft determinism and hard determinism because both theories would agree that everything is determined by either interior or exterior motives, right, or circumstances.
Yeah, which actually that kind of gets back to this point I was going to make about the sort of working definition. So, to every Leighton Flowers on one end and Veckel on the other end, the definitions that we use when we're talking about soft determinism, compatibilism, it's, and I'm using those terms interchangeably, are an affirmation that determinism is true, which means every single thing without any exception is determined. And also, humans are free, meaning that humans possess some level of free moral agency.
See, but Veckel doesn't agree with that.
Yeah, and we've even talked about this before. And to be fair, he's not alone. There's a couple other Calvinists who I love. I'm not talking to any sort of S on these guys.
But this is where the confusion comes from, CJ, because he would claim that he holds to compatibilism. And it's like, well, no, you don't, because you're denying that everything has been predetermined.
Well, and he would also claim, because he said before, actually in the conversation with you on Praise's channel, he was like, well, there are very many scholarly individuals like Matt Slick. I know Matt Slick personally. We live in the same city. He cool. Is a determinist, 100%. He is a compatibilist, but he doesn't shy away from the idea that CJ, everything is determined.
Favor, will you? If you could ask Matt if he'd be willing to come on and talk to me sometime, because every time I get a hold of him, he just tells me to call into his radio program. And then I only get to talk to him for like 10 minutes. Then he has to go to a commercial break and he goes to someone else. I'd actually like to have a detailed discussion with him sometime if he'd be willing to come on.
Yeah, I'll certainly pitch that to him.
And it's also annoying because sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, brother. Every time I go on, I have to reintroduce myself to him because he always forgets who I am. Like he just, yeah. I'm like, Matt, we've talked like 8 times. Like it's Kevin from New York. You. Oh, sorry. I never. And it's always the thing. I apologize. My memory's not that good. It's like, oh, okay. And so then you got to start over too, because he doesn't remember like where we left off the progress when we had the last conversation. So we have to start back at square one again, and he's going to bring up the same objections to what I've already said. And it's like, but I would like to talk to the guy, and that's why it needs to be a long, in-depth conversation. So that way he remembers everything's there at once. So the next time he comes like, oh yeah, I remember I had a really good conversation with that guy. And you know what I mean? And on the radio program, you don't get a long enough time to really develop things like that, where it's in depth and thorough and good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to be fair, also there is part of the issue of, when you're on radio,
yeah,
it's like, all right, you got to get everything out quick. Let's go. So then you start making mistakes, and then you start like not representing yourself accurately. Sometimes you even get frustrated. I used to call into Michael Brown's program, and it's hard to get a word in edgewise because he's got to be fast. So it's not even really his fault, but then I get frustrated, and now I feel like I'm acting like a putz. And I just don't want to. Yeah. So I totally hear that. I will run that by him. The one thing I will say is more than likely, if he did agree, it would have to be something moderated. Matt's not a particularly trusting guy when it comes to YouTubers. So it's possible if I could get him to watch some of your videos with me, maybe that could change. But for the most part, because, a lot of guys, you've experienced it. You just had a conversation with one of them not too long ago, right? A lot of guys on YouTube are, shock jocks and Real Housewives of Christianity and all that kind of nonsense. You know what I mean? And it's like, people are just not interested. But I'll definitely talk to him.
With that discussion with Smokey, even though I wasn't moderated. I think I did pretty good. So,
yeah, I thought that was fairly good also, actually.
Thank you.
I was the first time I had listened to anything Smokey had done in forever, and to be honest, probably the last time. But I'm just not interested, But I figured
you hear the part where he he tried to accuse me of some form of Calvinism, and I was like, well, no, I don't. I deny, such and such. And he was like, well, what you're essentially doing is, making Calvinism hard determinism like CJ does. And I'm like, wait a minute, but CJ claims to believe in compatibilism. And Smokey responded with bull beep. He's a fatalist. And I'm like, well, I don't think he would agree with that.
Well, part of the problem with Smokey in particular, and this goes to the same thing we were just talking about with Veckel. Not that they're in the same camp, but is a lot of these people don't understand terminology. Like, so for example, when he says I'm a fatalist, so Ryan and me and Ryan are actually fairly chummy now, but Ryan used to also say I was a fatalist. and has since said that he feels like he misunderstood what I was previously saying. Part of the reason that he thought that, in his own words, that he thought I was fatalistic was because I made a solid affirmation that God determines all things. And what's the first thing all you guys press us about, right? You always say, well, what about, and then you insert some kind of evil thing, right? Which, of course, makes sense because the question ultimately arises, does God ordain sin? And does that make him guilty of sin? Is he the author of sin? And so that's inevitably the question. And when people have
it
said,
wouldn't
does God...
make him guilty, but it would make him responsible for it.
Well, and on that note, when people would ask that question, okay, so does, and you of course already know this because we've talked so many times.
Yeah.
I just would flatly affirm it. Yes, God ordains all sins that have ever happened. Period. End of story. It's what the Westminster says. It's what Calvin said. It's what I believe. Let's move into the implications of that. Right. Because there's just no point in beating around the bush when it comes to that issue, because we all know where it eventually ends. And frankly,
I
it does make
appreciate you
Calvinists...
being upfront and honest about that. With some people that claim to be Reformed or Calvinistic, it's like pulling teeth to get a direct answer to that question. They'll run around like, well, it depends on what you mean. Or, well, I believe he's like John Myers in the side chat here, sharpening iron. Well, I believe he's determined everything that comes to pass, but he qualifies and says he excludes thoughts and actions of people.
Yeah, and my thing with that has always been you can caveat when it comes to this issue after the fact. So doesn't that make God the author of evil? Okay, well now since I've already answered in the affirmative, yes, God has determined everything that comes to pass, including sin.
Yep.
Now that caveat, it doesn't sound as, and I'm not, John, I'm not calling you dishonest. You know, I don't think you're dishonest, but it comes off sounding dishonest when you're not a Calvinist. But now when you're in my shoes of having already affirmed that, and not just me, but James White does the same thing.
John,
R.C.
what are you
Sproul
doing?
did.
Listen, I have it recorded on a live stream. You and I talked. I said, do you believe God has determined whatsoever comes to pass? And you said yes. And then we went to Acts chapter 4 and we were talking about the crucifixion. And I asked you, do you believe that God determined the evil thoughts and intentions on the hearts of the men that crucified Jesus? And you said no. So you were excluding those things from what God has determined. So that is what you said. You may not have said those exact words, but when you put 2 and 2 together, that is what you believe. So I don't understand this comment. Have you changed your position since you moved to the Philippines? Like, I'm not misrepresenting you.
Well, and even all that aside, I think the greater point here to even make is just to say caveat those things after, because if we all know where we're starting, then it makes it a lot less well, just frankly irritating, right? When people start to say yes, but I believe this, that, and the third as a caveat.
See, and it's important too, because when you're having discussions with people and people are trying to understand where you're coming from, and you want to show people where you're coming from, we can weigh the evidence, see, well, what's the truth here, and make ground and see like who's right, who's wrong, what's biblical. Because I mean, at the end of the day, if you really have a heart for the Lord, you just want to know what is true, right? Like you want to be more conformed to what God has actually revealed, what he says.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so there shouldn't be a problem, because if your position is true, or if my position is true, then there's no reason why we can't just plainly lay it out and weigh the evidence. Because if we have the truth, then the truth's on our side. So don't be ashamed of it. Just put it out there and let's interact. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand the whole dance thing.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why, when it comes to Now Smokey, right, why he would always claim that I was a fatalist, is because what he hears is, okay, well, you're telling me everything is determined, therefore everything is fated, therefore you're a fatalist. Right. What he's failing to realize, though, is that fatalism definitionally is hard determinism, but all determinism affirms that God has determined, or something, because I guess some determinists aren't Christians, right? But that everything is predetermined, right? And that's, I think, the big hang up with a lot of these guys. Compatibilism is, and this even gets back to the original point, right, about its working definition. Compatibilism, if in terms of soft determinism, means every single thing is determined without exception, and also, i.e., compatible with, hence the term, human beings have free will and are morally responsible. And so then, if that's the definition, basically what we're looking for in Scripture is, can we find events in Scripture that appear to be determined deterministically, by which I mean causally determined in some sense, There's a domino reaction, in other words. And the individual agents involved are also either A, shown to be free, B, shown to be morally responsible, or C, both, right? And I want to caveat that a little bit as well, because this is not to say that each individual instance will necessarily prove determinism writ large, right? In other words, if I can find a case where God has deterministically made something certain, and also the individuals are free, what I have shown there is that compatibilism in a limited sense is biblical, or at the very least that you can't argue against the logic behind it. I have not demonstrated that determinism writ large is true and that God therefore determines everything. And I have been very open. I think you need to make an accumulative case for that. I don't think you can say, okay, well, this situation here is clearly determined, therefore all other situations are determined. But, you can say kind of like the inductive arguments in philosophy. Okay, I have A, B, C, D. Likely, I have E as well. You see what I mean? So, I think that would be where I would start off with the caveats, and then I'll let you comment before I actually go into some of the scriptures there, or comment, not caveat.
So, a lot of compatibilists say that you're, when they describe it, they would say like you're free to do what God has determined you to do, and then some further break it down that you're free to do according to your nature, and then they go and you're going to act according to your strongest desire, which is determined by your sinful nature and outside circumstances to yourself. Would that be a fair characterization of the compatibilist position?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple things there. First off, yes, just to answer your question simply is yes.
Okay.
A couple points I would want to add there. So on the greatest desire element of it, this is not limited to determinists, but it is generally a accepted fact in philosophy and psychology also that choices ultimately stem from your greatest desire, right? Now, how that desire actually came to be is where the question then arises between a libertarian and a determinist, right? But the reason you decided to, the example I gave in my book, if you remember, was giving your wallet to somebody who's robbing you at gunpoint.
Yes.
Because the classical response is...
You made a distinction between will and desire, right?
Yes, exactly. And
now, when I was talking with Graham with that, he said that didn't make sense to him. How do you separate between will and desire? And I actually started to kind of agree with the way you were parsing it out. And he's like, so you don't agree with me, Kevin? I was like, I don't think so, Graham. I don't know, because I think you're making it too simplistic. And I think the human psyche is more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with that, right? And
yeah,
you can kind of think of it like this, right? Will and desire are not the same, but whatever you will ultimately be grounded in some desire. So let me explain that with fill in the blanks with the robbing example, right? Yeah, your desire there is not, you're doing something you do not desire, which is to give your wallet. Therefore, that would make people, but hang on, actually, back up for a minute. Desire is what you want to do. Will is what you take deliberate action to do, right? So in this situation, you take deliberate action to hand over your wallet. You did not actually desire or want to give over your wallet, right? And so therein lies the distinction. But with that distinction, some may say, okay, doesn't that mean that will ultimately deriving from desire is false? And the answer is no, because other desires actually dictate what you did as far as your will is concerned, right? So in this instance, you have no desire to give over your wallet, even though you did it. But you do have a desire to stay alive, right? And so your desire to stay alive is ultimately a greater desire than your desire to keep your money. Ergo, what your will arises out of one desire, thus making you go against another desire, right? And this is actually something that we have to deal with every day as humans because, most of us don't desire to go to work. I don't know how much you desire to go to the gym, but at least at first, going to the gym is miserable. When I first started working out, my body hurt all the time, right? And I was like, I don't want to do this. I just want to eat Big Macs and watch television. Like, this is dumb. But it's, you know, it's same old kind of thing, right? And so
I actually kind of wanted to comment on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, before I do, there's a Muslim in the side chat. Hello, Aladdin. No. So your question doesn't make sense. Is this a Unitarian Christian channel? Well, that's a contradiction, because Christianity is Trinitarian, and so if someone's claimed to be a Unitarian Christian, that's a contradiction. There's no such thing. Unitarians are not Christians. So if you're a Christian, you're a Trinitarian, which I am. I'm a Trinitarian. So if you're looking for a cult member like a Jehovah's Witness, which is a Unitarian, they're not Christians, but you're at the wrong place. This is a Trinitarian channel. But yeah. Anyway, so what I was going to say is, are you sure so the guy given the wallet, the example he gave. So I would still argue that his greatest desire, you know, because you work hard for your money, assuming the guy in the analogy actually works, right? He's not on like government assistance or something.
Right.
You work hard for your money. So you don't want to just willingly give up your money to some jerk off, you know, that comes up, points a gun at your head. And it's true, he also has a will to live, but that doesn't necessarily necessitate that the greatest desire is to live. It could be that he has two desires that are in conflict and he has to choose in the moment which one to act on. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have a greater desire to keep his money. So for example, like let's say someone has a desire, a goal they set in life to be a policeman. And along the way, you know, there's a bump in the road. They get some sort of injury that prevents them from passing the physical exam test. And so now they have to have surgery on their leg, whatever, a quad tear or something. And so now they have to stay motivated, but their greatest desire is to be a police officer. But the question is, are they going to continue in that desire with now the extra hardship it's going to take to get there? Right? Just because things get in the way or there's other choices you have to make along the way that seem to compromise, it doesn't mean that, you know, being the police officer still isn't your greatest desire to do.
So I think that's actually, first off, a interesting point to bring up, and it will, I think, illuminate part of why we tend to argue for the greatest desire model, right? So in that situation, somebody, you know, tears a quad or something like that, some kind of major injury, right? That person may actually truly believe that their greatest desire is to be a policeman and that they're only not going through with it because of circumstance, right? Now, in this situation, let's just get this out of the way. We have to assume that they can go through with it, because if the tear is so strong that you're just actually not able to, like you're never going to physically recover, then it doesn't really matter what you desire. The choice has been made for you, right? So in this situation, let's assume that there is a realistic healing process that the person can go through, right? Now, you have two guys, call them, you know, Joe and Jack for sake of argument. And Joe does decide to go through the process of recovery and everything that entails, maybe some physical rehabilitation. Maybe he's got to work out his quads a little bit more and also a little bit more carefully, because at first, of course, he's recovering. Maybe certain dietary choices, etc., whatever it happens to be. Maybe more money even, because you're getting a gym membership, going to physical therapy, all that kind of stuff, right? And Joe's going through all that because he really desires to be a police officer, and he sees it, knows it's possible, decides to go for it. Our next individual there, Jack, I think I called him Jack, might have been John. We're going with Jack. Jack also firmly believes in his heart of hearts that his greatest desire is to be a police officer, but he ultimately concludes that the sacrifice is too great. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe it's just the case that he feels like he doesn't have enough money. Remember, in this situation, he does actually have enough money to make it work, because we have to assume he can, right? But maybe it'll just be harder for him. Maybe you can't go out as often, or you can't pay for your Hulu bill or something. I don't know. You got to sacrifice something for the monetary thing. Maybe he feels like he doesn't have enough time, or he's going to sacrifice things he doesn't want to sacrifice as a result. And so he ultimately does not end up pursuing his police career as vigorously as Joe did, right? Now, in that situation, Jack firmly believes his greatest desire is to be a police officer. But by his actions, he's actually demonstrated that's not true, right? Because he's actually shown us he certainly has a great desire to be a police officer, but the sacrifices he would have to be willing to make, whether they be physical or monetary or whatever.
Wow.
Say again.
I just dropped out. I don't know what happened.
Oh, shoot.
I've been gone for like 30 seconds trying to get back in. That was bizarre.
I did not even notice that, actually. Well, to be fair, you're actually in my pocket right now. I have headphones in, so that's why. Did you hear what I was saying there by chance?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
For some reason, StreamYard booted me out and said the page can't be found. I just got back. I'm so sorry. Would you mind repeating yourself? Like, I missed like the last 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, no issue. Totally good. Totally good. So in the situation you have, like I said, you have your Joe and Jack. Joe both have a quad injury that debilitates them to the point of where they have to go through an arduous recovery. We're going to say it's roughly the same recovery just for sake of simplicity. And both can actually go through the recovery if they so choose. In other words, it might be very, very difficult, but they have the money, they do have the time, they do have the ability. They're not just so injured that it's not going to be possible, right?
Okay.
So Joe, the first one, does go through with it. He sacrifices the things he needs to sacrifice. Maybe he cancels a Hulu account so he has more money so he can go to physical therapy. Maybe he also decides, hey, I'm not going to do this hobby I like. Let's say it's disc golf as much as I would, or I'm not going to have as much time for movies with my wife so that I can actually have time for the physical therapy. Got to move some stuff around, that kind of thing, right? But I'm going to go through with it because I really, really want to be a police officer, and that is my greatest desire, right? Now, the other guy, Jack, does not go through with this. Now, Jack probably believes in his heart of hearts that his greatest desire is to be a police officer. And it's actually even probably a very tough decision for him to not go through with it. Maybe it's a very depressing thing. It was his dream, and it seems to be taken away from him. But he reasons that he's not willing to give up the extra cash he would need to give up in order to go through physical therapy, the extra time he would need to give up in order to go through the police academy again and to do the physical therapy and to work out and all that. He's not willing to go through maybe the pain that's necessary in order to recover at a full level, right? And so on and so forth. And so even though he believes that his greatest desire is to be a police officer, by his actions, he's actually demonstrated that that's not true, right? Because he's shown us actually, let's say it's the disc golf and time with your wife, right? Playing disc golf, right? He's actually demonstrated he values being able to unwind with disc golf and watch the movies with his wife on whatever night they do that more than he values the dream, which is why he chose those things over and against the things that would be necessary in order to achieve his dream of becoming a police officer, right?
Well, hang on, because that's essentially what Graham was arguing. But here's the problem, though. Is it true, or just let's think through this. Is it possible that his greatest desire at one point in time was to be a police officer? And then as time progressed and more things got in the way of that goal, that it's possible over time his greatest desire changed?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I have no doubts about that whatsoever.
So that's an example of someone not always acting in accordance to their greatest desire.
So the issue that you would have there is when you talk about acting in accordance with your greatest desire, the actions, individual actions, we tend to think of actions sometimes as being multifaceted and over periods of time. But actually, actions are always momentary, right? In other words, while there may have been a series of decisions that led to me watching this video, the decision to watch this video happened in less than a second. I saw the video, I clicked on it. You know what I mean? Now, the deliberation, the thought process, like I said, there can be a whole list of things that led to that moment at that time. But the actual action itself happens, you could do the whole quote unquote in the blink of an eye kind of thing, right? So at the time you actually acted, which is the thing that arises from your greatest desire, at that moment, your greatest desire was the thing that you decided to do. And again, the evidence you have by that is the fact that at that moment something else that you could have done, which maybe you did also have a great desire for, is something that you did not decide to do. In a case where you're changing your desires, perhaps this guy did at one point have that as his greatest desire, which is maybe why he joined the police academy in the first place. But over time, he gets weighed down by bills and the physical toll. And maybe he just values the idea of, like I said, the disc golf and hanging out with the wife and stuff like that more. And so his desires have changed. And so at the moment he decides to act there, the greatest desire is actually not any longer what it was, say, 2 years ago or however long it was.
And that's fair, but people don't be like, well, my greatest desire is this, and then 2 seconds later it's not. It's like it's something that would have to change gradually over a period of time. I don't think it's just spontaneous like that.
Yeah, and I think I'd have no issue with that, right?
Okay.
I think the main point with all of this, as far as the explanation, is when you separate will and desire, will is that which you deliberately decide to do, right? Mm-hmm. So we think of free will. That's kind of a weird term, or the will to live. In terms of philosophy, that's actually a misuse of the word, but in terms of colloquially, it actually is a proper use of the word, which does make things a little confusing. But for simplicity, we'll just take this philosophical answer. Will is the deliberate action to do something, and desire is the thing which you want to do. And those are not necessarily the same thing, because you can will to go against your desire, but everything you will ultimately be grounded in whatever your greatest desire was at that moment in time.
Okay. And so when we're that's fine, whatever. But when we talk about Christians, right? So now it's getting more complicated, right? Because I believe Christians have two natures. I'm not sure what your position is on that.
I would agree.
Okay, cool. And so you have the desire of your flesh, and you have the desire of the new heart, right? Or you've been a partaker of the divine nature, as Peter, the Apostle Peter, puts it in. Is it 2 Peter 1? You've been made a partaker of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption of the world. So you have two conflicting desires. You have the desire that the flesh wants, and now you have the desire of the spirit. And then these are at war with one another. So you could argue you have two opposing forces, two opposing desires. And it depends on moment to moment which one you give into, but it would be kind of hard to prove one has superiority over the other. Because if someone says, well, your greatest desire is to do sin, well, then that's arguing that the Holy Spirit is less powerful than the sinful nature. If you argue your greatest desire is always to do what the Holy Spirit wants, then you're essentially arguing for sinless perfectionism, because if that's the case, then you're not going to sin. So it's kind of hard to say, well, you're going to act according to your strongest desire. Well, no, I think it's more complicated. It's especially for the life of a believer. There's two opposing desires, two opposing forces that are going on. So you have the old nature, the new nature, and these two are conflicting, I would say, in the spirit. And then in the soul, you make the decision which one you are going to act on, right? So what if someone were to say you have two opposing great desires, and then you have to choose which one to give into? But it'd be kind of hard to prove which one is greater than the other. In you know what I'm saying?
Well, in a way, yes. Like, I definitely see where the conflict arises. In a manner of speaking, you could almost kind of circularly say, well, the one you did, right? But it's also not quite as circular as it initially sounds, because...
Wait, hold on. You are right. Isn't that kind of like begging the question, though? Like, well, you did according to your greatest desire, therefore you always do according to your greatest desire. That's like a fallacy? Isn't that it's a logical fallacy, begging the question?
Right, which is why I say we have to do some work to demonstrate that this would be what they call a brute fact, which brute facts are inherently circular by nature because they're not based off of any previously existing facts, right? Like 2 + 2 = 4 because 2 and 2 is 4. It's circular by its very nature, but that's because it's a brute fact. There's nothing grounding 2 + 2 = 4, unless of course you take a position like God grounds math, which, to be fair, I do. But then at that point, God becomes the brute fact, not the math itself, right? So the question then would arise is will some kind of a brute fact that's not grounded in any previously existing facts? And I would argue that it is for this reason, right? So we could ask the question, what is a decision at a mental level? Like, we can explain what a decision is dictionarily. It's deciding to do one thing over another. But from the perspective of the human psyche, what is a decision? What happens in the brain when somebody makes a decision? And I think most of us would probably agree that a decision happens when an individual weighs two or more options and ultimately chooses one option over the other, right? So that would then lead to a follow-up question. Why did that person ultimately choose to do one thing over the other? And here you can actually start to get a lot of different explanations. You can say maybe because of somebody's moral convictions, or you can say because they reasoned in such and such a way. Maybe they were hungry, and one option was to eat a burrito, and the other option was to go hang out with your friends and do the disc golf thing, even though that would mean you have to hold off on your burrito. And so they decided to fulfill carnal desires in that sense, which would be the eating, right? All these different things you could potentially look at. But then that doesn't actually really answer the question, because you can say, well, I reasoned and came to the conclusion that option A was better than option B. But why are you the type of person who cares about the reason in the first place, right? There are plenty of people who, when rationalizing in their head, will see an option that is more reasonable and will be like, yeah, you know what? I don't want to do that. In fact, I think a lot of times, when it comes to like inspirational movies and stuff like that, that's actually one of the things the hero does that everybody cheers him on for. Maybe the reasonable thing is to quit, and he says, no, I'm not going to, because I desire this thing so much. You know what I mean? And actually, we're all cheering him on for doing that. But the point is, so some people are going to value that rationality, that logic, that reason. Other people aren't. Why? Some people are going to value the carnal things a little bit more. And the question there is why, right? So ultimately, you start boiling this down back and forth. And it's, well, the reason I gave more credit to the rational side of my brain than the carnal side of my brain, or my thoughts, we'll say, is ultimately because I have more of an affinity for the rational things than the carnal things as part of my personality, right?
Okay.
I'm not. So right.
As you know, I'm now. This is just debate preparation. I didn't invite you in to debate you. I'm just here so you can help me work through these things to get your thoughts, right? Because we have different perspectives. But I'm not here to debate you. Again, I appreciate you being on. But I have a passage here on the screen. I'm curious as what do you think exactly is going on here in Galatians? And there's another example I'll give in Romans 7. But Galatians 5:17 says, for the flesh lusts against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these things are contrary to one another, so that you cannot do the things that you would. Now, most modern translations translate it this way. For the flesh wars against the spirit, and the spirit wars against the flesh, and these things are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish to do. Now, in compatibilism, how does that make sense? Because don't you always do the things you wish to do?
Well, not necessarily, right? Because you have to, this is why I say you would separate, you have to do the separation of desire and will, and then you have to establish that the will is grounded in desire. And the reason for that is because you have many desires. At any point in time, you will have more than one desire. As a believer, at least a good deal of those desires should be grounded in the Holy Spirit and what he is guiding your life to do, right? And so in that particular instance, I think Paul is just speaking when he uses the phrase wish there. I think he's speaking in the sense of a sense of carnality. What Paul is saying, what I wish for in Pauline language is what my carnal flesh wishes for, not necessarily what the Holy Spirit is wishing for in that instance. That's not to say I literally don't wish for what the Holy Spirit wants. In fact, if I didn't, one might even question whether or not I was walking in the Spirit to begin with, right?
But isn't Galatians 5, isn't he saying that he wishes to do the things that God wants? Isn't that like the context? I mean, if maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Well, actually, I think you're kind of hitting on exactly the point, right? On one end, the Spirit guides you to do those things to go against those things you wish to do. And on the other end, you wish to fulfill God's purposes. So you have conflicting wishes, right? So at some point there
Okay,
has to be an
yeah, I get your point here, but the way Paul words it, he doesn't say it that way though. He just says that you're not doing the things you wish to do.
here. That's true. In Romans chapter 7, though, he does explain more in depth the battle
Okay.
between flesh and spirit. And I think Galatians, if I remember correctly, I think Galatians was actually written before Romans. But for us, it doesn't
Um,
necessarily matter because we actually have them both, right? So, um,
okay. Um, so the King James wording of this is a little hard to follow. Let me. I'll go to the New King James. If you prefer, I read it from the King James. I will. But are you okay? Are you okay with the New King James?
yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Okay. So I'll start at verse 14. Um, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I don't practice. But what I hate is what I do. If then I do what I will not to do, I agree with the law that it is good, but it's no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. So his language here is interesting, right? Because he's saying he's doing things that he doesn't will to do. Um, so what's going on there? Because it seems like he's acting in accordance to things that are contrary. In the King James, he says that I do what I hate, not doing what I will to do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, See what I mean? Like just the way it's worded seems to like contradict this idea of always acting in accordance with your strongest desire. Because Paul, now he does not right say it that way, but it seems like he's alluding to his strongest desire is to please God, but he still finds himself doing things that he shouldn't do.
Right. And so I think this is one of the particular strengths, I think, of the idea of, and this isn't the exact topic here, but just to give you an idea where I'm coming from with this, of the idea of regeneration preceding faith, or you can even take it to something we might agree on, which is lordship, the idea that regeneration will have inevitable fruits, at least at some point, greater and lesser values. Obviously, there's a whole discussion there. But for Calvinists generally, there are certains who disagree with this, like R. Scott Clark and others. But for Calvinists generally, we tend to think of the human will sans Christ, the carnal will, as being ultimately bound by sin in not a
Um,
complete sense to the point
mm,
where we can't do anything good,
yeah,
but in an ultimate sense to the point of where everything we do, even if good, is ultimately tainted by sin.
sure.
So
And do you know what Turretin fans' thoughts are on this particular issue?
my understanding is that Turretin fan and I would agree largely on this. In other words, I think that Turretin would largely say, yes, the spirit does cause a change in man, and that change is necessary because man is ultimately so enslaved to sin that even when he does do good, it's ultimately tainted by some level of sin and negativity. Um,
Okay.
that being said, it's been an awful long time since me and him have talked about that, and I'm not sure if I'm remembering him correctly.
Okay.
Um,
Well, fair enough, right? That's yeah, fair enough.
but so in that instance, it is true that you have a great desire fighting against a great desire, one of which arises from what Paul would refer to as the flesh, and one of which would arise from what Paul would refer to as the spirit. I think for a believer, um, in the will, because you only have one will, right? Unless you're two different persons, you only actually have one will. In fact, fun fact, this is part of why modalists and
I
Trinitarians
don't know
get so.
about one will, CJ, because I feel like the sinful nature has a will and the divine nature has a will, and those two are conflicting, and then you have to choose which one you act upon. If you want to look at it this way, because I believe the mind, when Scripture talks about, when Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength," I think mind and soul are interchangeable. Like, in other words, I think mind is simply just like a metaphoric language for soul. So what you have is you have two things that are in the spirit that are influencing the soul. And so you could say that's like two opposing um wills. I don't know. It's really complicated, but go ahead.
Well, remember, will in this instance is your uh, deliberate action, right? or you could even say your capacity to deliberately act, right? So the reason you can only have one will is because you're ultimately only one person. Um, the
Oh, I
it,
see what you're saying. Right. So you would say that you have composing or multiple desires, but ultimately only one will by that definition.
exactly,
Right. Okay. Yeah, I
exactly.
follow you. I follow you. Okay. So maybe I was just conflating something. Okay. I think you're right, actually. Um, yeah.
Right. And so in that particular instance, since you only have one will, even though you do have this competing flesh and spirit within you, right? Ultimately, you, the individual person that is, yourself, myself, any other individual, has to decide to do one of those things at some point in time, right? Um, so, hang on one second. Um,
No worries.
Trying to get something out here that for some reason is stuck. There we go.
Yo, how's it going? Being a dad.
Oh, it's awesome. Actually, that's probably the coolest thing that's ever happened to me at the moment. Actually, and I'm not
Really?
exaggerating that. I've had a lot of really cool things happen too. So,
See, when I was younger, uh, I used to be like, man, it would be so cool to be a dad one day. But then as I got older and I saw just how expensive things are and how much time it takes to, make sure to raise a child and teach them properly. I don't know. I'm just very selfish with my time where it's like, yeah, I guess I am a little bit self-centered in that area where it's like I'm not willing to dedicate that amount of time to raising another human being to make sure they do things properly and invest that much money in them and stuff. And I don't know. I kind of gave up on the dad thing essentially, because I'm not married anyway. Um, but yeah, when I was younger, I definitely wanted to have a son, and then, or yeah, a son. Oh, I don't want a daughter; I want a son. But as I got older, I kind of gave up on that, and now I'm kind of more of against it. But other people want kids, great. I don't know, man. I don't think I got time for it.
well, the one thing I will say in that regard, actually, I'll say two. The first thing is a friend of mine from church told me when we first discovered that my wife was pregnant.
Hmm.
Says, the first thing I learned when the baby was born was just how selfish I really was. Um, and I think that that's largely true. I think it's a lesson that. Ooh, hang on. Did I cut out? Are you still there?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, CJ.
Okay,
I
sorry about
turned off
that.
my camera because for whatever reason, my signal's dropping up and down, so I turned the camera off to help save bandwidth.
Okay. All right, awesome. So yeah, and I think that's very much true. And I think that happens pretty much anytime you get a big responsibility like that, right? Like you probably learned that when you get married. I certainly did. And then it's just like kind of a turtles all the way down kind of situation. Um, but the second thing to that is I think a lot of that kind of changes for you. Not to say that you don't have to do any sort of work, right? Um, but I don't think a lot of times people like decide to love their kids. I think people decide not to love their kids, but I don't think you really decide to love your kids. I think it just kind of happens. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like you just
sure.
have this kid, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, well now I
Yeah.
want to do less selfish things. Um,
I feel like if I did have a kid, I would really love the kid, but I would at the same time I'd be angry because now it's like I can't spend as much time doing the things that like I enjoy. Like I love going out and playing disc golf. I love going online and having theology discussions. I like, going out once a week and hanging out with my friends. We have like a game night. Because I have the same friends since high school. I have a very small group of friends and I've known most of them my entire adult life. And I feel like adding kids to that equation would greatly hamper me from it. Have you ever heard like you have a friend, right? It's someone you spend time with, someone you interact with, someone you hang out with. But the less and less you do that, over time you no longer have a friend, you have an acquaintance. And it seems to me like I would have to sacrifice a lot of like personal time and relationships with others for the benefit of being a father, to make sure you're raising the kid properly, that you're spending enough time with them, especially when they're younger. as they get older, you could back off a little, like what my dad did. When I turned 17, he just let me do whatever I wanted, basically, because he taught me right from wrong, and I had a good head on my shoulder, and I didn't get in trouble. But before that point, though, when kids are young, the development age, you really have to be there to really help them, to understand right and wrong, to give them, a sense of morality, and you know, help them to learn the hard lessons in life so they don't have to go through it. It's like there's consequences for things. You got to teach them everything, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just I'm not willing to sacrifice all that time that I'd be doing for other things and spending with others and stuff, and then, not to, this is a Christian channel, but, not to mention the time it takes away from the intimacy with your significant other. You guys can't be, well, keep it PG, right? You can't be as close,
Yeah.
all the time like you normally would, because the baby's constantly waking up in the middle of the night crying. You got to go, you know what I'm saying? It's just there's a lot that goes into it, and I understand, like, having kids is a good thing, right? But I don't feel like it's for everyone. I don't think I have the proper mindset for it.
Well, and I even think, to a large extent, it is a good thing to kind of plan out.
Yeah.
Obviously, I won't go into detail, but I know somebody who recently had a child with somebody they were with, but they weren't married and they hadn't been together very long. And the long and short of it is, it has just turned into a complete disaster. And we're talking like this child is 6 months old, so it very quickly turned into a complete disaster.
That's unfortunate. So, yeah, and that's another problem too, is having a kid in a broken home, that you're doing tremendous damage to that child.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to get married first. You got to get. I think it's sometimes, I guess you don't necessarily have complete control over who you fall in love with, but if you can marry a believer, absolutely, because that's a huge, huge, huge potential issue if you guys don't believe the same things.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, hopefully they convert before, because that is an option, and it happens a lot, actually. So I agree with a lot of that, and I don't want to sound like I'm pressuring anything either, because to be honest, people should, if they don't feel like they are in a position to do it properly, they probably shouldn't do it. That being said, I think a lot of what you said is kind of almost a reason to do it, in the sense that I think it makes you ultimately, you almost create a fork in the road, so to speak, right? You have
CJ, I mean, looking at it even this way, it's like someone like me, I'm pushing 40. Like, being 40 years old and having a kid, that's kind of like, think about that. By the time the kid's 18 or 17, I'll be in my pushing 70. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if you did everything right, very likely, right? Because you'd have to,
because you want to be able to go out there and run with the kids. You want to be able to play with them, play catch, tag, and it's like at that age though, like, you're really not gonna be that mobile. I mean, unless you're like a genetic freak or something like Hulk Hogan or whatever, you know what I mean? But I'm not, I'm a big guy and I work hard to just try to lose the weight I have been. I'm down 25 pounds, but I'm just saying, if I live to be that age, because my dad didn't even make it to 50, and he wasn't even a big guy. But it's like, it's just going to be so physically draining. Like, I wouldn't have the energy, I don't think, at that age to keep up with the kid. And so I think, even if hypothetically, if I changed my mind, and even if I wanted to have a kid now, I think I'm just simply too old to actually go and do it.
Well, it is possible, I mean, but like anyway. I said, I can't say anything other than, in my personal experience, I think that it is probably, I won't say the very best, because obviously I think that God created humans ultimately for himself.
Sure.
As far as speaking from a humanistic perspective, though, I think that part of what we're supposed to do is have families, which is not to say everybody, right?
He did command Adam. He said, "Go and multiply." So.
Right, and for this reason, of man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right?
Yeah.
That being said, obviously Paul didn't, so it's not as if, like, you're sinning if you don't,
Right, it's not blasphemy, not I mean, because I mean, everyone's different. Some people just don't have the personality for it. It's and there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's not like you're yeah, like you said, it's not sin. It's like, well, if you're choosing not to do that, it's not necessarily a sin because I mean, how many kids are born a day? I mean, even let's say like someone like me, one person in society decides not to have a child, there's still millions of babies born every day. Like, it's not going to affect the population if a few people are like, maybe not. So it's fine. God's
yeah,
in
and
control over it anyway. He's going to work through that regardless. So
that's true. That's true. And actually, whether you're a determinist or not, that is literally one of those things where it's like,
yeah.
whether or not
See,
the
I
mechanism
believe God
again
is
keep it.
sovereign too. I just don't believe he determines everything. I believe he's more sovereign than that. But
Well, and we
yeah,
can even say, to kind of a little agreement part between the two of us in regards to God's sovereignty is like, to keep it PG, you can go through the motions all day, but whether or not the mechanics work is kind of up to him, you know.
sure.
Um,
Right, because God does ground and sustain all things. He requires him to sustain you for everything that you do. Even if he's not determining it, he's still causing your atoms and molecules to stay together so you can do things. And so, yeah, nothing happens outside of his permission.
yeah, well, and it's especially when you think of a thing like conception. I mean,
Sure.
how many times does somebody, go through the action and ultimately not have a child? I mean, how many times do you hear a story of whether it's a miscarriage or, hey, we've just been trying for so long, or even though there was, some birth control method taken, it just happened anyway, so it's like, and really, ultimately, we could say, well, there's scientific reasons and how the body reacts and all that kind of stuff. But all of that for the Christian is just a fancy way of saying, yeah, God has ways of making sure that you trying not to have one fails and you trying to have one also fails, or they succeed, or, if there wasn't in between, anything in between. But I think that's kind of actually the only two options. But, so yeah, it ultimately is even more so than something else like, whether or not you become like a successful businessman or something like that. A lot of your own decisions are going to play into that into an even greater extent than something biological, like whether or not you have a child, I think, at least. Anyway, I feel like kind of got
Yeah.
off topic a
So
little bit.
I do want to get into, asking you for some, passages you believe support this idea of compatibilism in the Bible. But before we do, I just briefly want to show a clip because apparently John has forgotten. So John and I had a live stream about Calvinism, and I uploaded a video where he contradicted himself. So the video I uploaded is called Calvinists Contradict Themselves. So the point of me showing this is not to point out that he's contradicting himself, but I want to point out that he did agree that everything was determined. And then when I asked were the thoughts and intentions of the men that crucified Jesus determined, he denied it. And in the side chat, he's claiming, "Oh, I didn't say that." Well, maybe you forgot, but yes, you did. So I'm going to quickly play this clip, and then CJ and I are going to get back to the discussion. Now, the only reason why I'm doing this is because I'm just trying to prove that I'm not lying. Because maybe John forgot, because he's in the side chat claiming he never said that. So I'm going to give the receipts. Okay. So when I say something, I back it up. I'm not full of crap. I'm not lying. So here we go.
Here, I want to read what Leighton said about this. The crucifixion of Jesus, this man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of the wicked men, put him to death by nailing him on the cross. That they did with your power and what your hand has decided before that should happen. Acts 2:23 and 4:28. Let me know what you think about this. Leighton says many Calvinists argue something like this: if God determined the worst evil of all time without blame, then we should be able to accept that God can determine all evil events without blame. He says this is a common error of Calvinism. They take unique examples of God working to bring about a good purpose through the evil intentions of mankind as proof that God sovereignly brought the evil intentions themselves, that he sovereignly works in the same way. So basically Leighton is saying that he doesn't have a problem saying that the event was determined, but he has a problem with saying that the evil actions and intentions of the heart of the men were determined by God.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't believe that God determined their evil intentions in their heart, do you?
And there you go. He nodded his head. No, no. So yes, John, that is a positive affirmation from you. When you earlier in that same stream said, "Yes, I believe God has determined everything," and I asked you, "Do you believe that includes the evil thoughts and intentions of the hearts of the men that crucified Jesus?" You sat there and you shook your head, "No." So I'm not lying. That was your position. So deal with it. Okay, I got receipts, buddy. I'm not, I'm not lying. If I'm up here on a public platform and I'm making a claim that someone said so and so or whatever, you better believe I'm going to demonstrate, that you said it. I'm not full of crap. I'm not lying. So hope that's sufficient for you, John. I don't know if you've changed your position or what, but that is what you held to a year ago. That is what was said there. Anyone can go watch it for themselves. But anyway, hello, Will Freeman. Good to see you. Yep. All right. So CJ, if we had to go to the Bible and you were using the Bible to try to demonstrate this philosophy that free will and determinism were both happening at once, what passage would you bring up?
So actually, the one you just brought up is one that I think is very good. However, since it was just brought up, I'll actually move to the other one of the two I chose, which is it's three, but it's the same story. Genesis 45:5, Genesis 45:8, and Genesis 50:20. So
Genesis 45:5. Okay.
For context, all of these are the Joseph and his brother's story. Okay. Which is going to be, of course, no surprise to anybody that this is one of the ones that comes up because it's one of the first ones.
Are you talking about when Joseph gets sold into slavery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and in Genesis 45:5, and actually, when it comes to Genesis 45, since those two verses are so close, and you're probably going to want context anyway, we can just say Genesis 45:5 to 8, rather than splitting those apart. In Genesis 45, well, hang on, let me back up for a second. So let's recall that at this point, hopefully, if you're a good Berean and you're reading your Bible correctly, you've already read Genesis 37, which is the chapter where he actually gets sold into slavery, right? And the reason I bring that up is to say when that takes place, there is certainly no element of like possession or puppetry or anything like that. It certainly appears like the brothers are freely deciding on their own accord to sell Joseph into slavery because of their own vile desires in their heart, right? That certainly seems to be what is established in Genesis 37. And on top of that, they at least themselves think of themselves as blameworthy. And we know that throughout the story. First off, they try to hide it in Genesis 37 from their father. Second off, when they actually do go to meet with the Pharaoh, they start to, feel guilty. Oh, the reason he's doing this is because of the thing we did, which, I mean, at this point, that's like 12, 13 years ago, something like that. And they're still feeling guilty about it. When they finally figure out it's Joseph, oh, he's going to take revenge, right? So they clearly feel guilty. The story is clearly portrayed as if they freely decided to do it. So there's no real debate between anybody as far as whether or not they were morally responsible or whether or not they were acting freely, right? But notice this. In Genesis 45, and I'll start at verse 5 and read through to 8. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that you sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall be neither earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth. You just said it twice, right? And to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now, and this is the real interesting part here. So now it was not you who sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh and lord to all of his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, one could reasonably ask the question, what are you talking about, Joseph? I already read Genesis 37. It was definitely them. They definitely did that, right?
Okay.
So Joseph can't be speaking here in a completely wooden, literal sense. He can't be saying, actually, no, you guys didn't send me here, but God did, right?
So I know where you're going with this, and I'm not going to necessarily give a rebuttal. I have a response. But because the point of view coming on here is just so I could see what passages you would use.
Right.
But, yeah. But I would have a response to. I think I know where you're going with it. But yeah, go ahead.
Right. And so, but he's so confident that actually it was God's intention for him to be sold into slavery, that not only does he repeat it 3 times in verses 5, 7, and 8, but he goes as far as to say it wasn't even you guys who did it. Now, again, why he says that, we don't necessarily know. Maybe he's trying to comfort them. Maybe he's just trying to make the point in a poetic kind of way. Who knows why he actually says, why he goes as far as to say, you didn't do it. But what we do know is he very loudly proclaims multiple times, God is the one who wanted me here, and specifically through your actions. And how do we know that? Well, because he's going as far as to not find them blameworthy in his eyes, at least, in Joseph's own personal eyes.
So
not find them blameworthy for what they have.
I would say that God didn't determine the evil decisions of the brothers, but I would say God permitted it so that he could deliver Israel out of the famine. So again, you have God having complicated. His mind is very complicated, right? It's like, so God knows everything in advance. He foreknows everything. And I would agree with the Calvinists that some events have been determined, like the crucifixion of Jesus. But what I would do is I would ask, well, how can you prove, that God determined for the brothers to sell Joseph? Why could we not say that God permitted Joseph to be sold so that he can work through that for the desired outcome, Joseph becomes the viceroy of Egypt, and the children of Israel ultimately end up leaving Egypt, generations later with all the possessions of Egypt. And God, used the famine to accomplish that, but he didn't determine the choices of the brothers to do evil things. And that's essentially where I would go with it.
So I think there's 2 things there that would have to be noted, right? So the first thing is you ask, how could we demonstrate that this was determined rather than allowed, right?
Yeah, right.
And
so you'd have to show how permission could not come into play.
Yeah, and I'll even, for the sake of simplicity, I'll even forego my usual non-distinction argument, because that gets us into a different point. So we'll just stick with the text. I think there are 2 things that would demonstrate that this has to be something God deliberately did rather than merely allowed. So the first thing is Joseph's language itself. Right?
Can I ask for clarification? When you say God deliberately did, are you speaking of the evil actions of Joseph's brothers? Are you claiming that God did that?
I would say that God determined the actions of Joseph's brothers.
So God somehow moved on the heart of the brothers to put that desire to sell Joseph. So God put that desire there. Is that what you're arguing?
So I wouldn't want to get into the metaphysic of it quite yet.
No, we don't have to. I'm just asking, is that essentially where you're going with it? Like God put the thought or the motive on the hearts of which ones was it again? It wasn't Reuben. It was
well, it was really everybody but Reuben.
Right.
Judah's kind of the ringleader, but it's pretty much everybody except Reuben.
Everyone, So God moved in the hearts of the 10 other brothers to put it in their heart and mind to do something horrible to Joseph, to determine the outcome. Is that essentially where you're going?
Yeah. Well, for sake of simplicity, we'll just say yeah, because
you don't have to do it for sake of simplicity. If there's a caveat, you can do that. I mean, because not all Calvinists agree on how they parse that out, which is where it gets kind of complicated here and hard, because I'm not sure which path Turretin would take. But if you want to give your take, that's fine. I'm talking to you at the moment. So,
well, the only reason I say for sake of simplicity is I think the idea you're going for is correct. The only reason I add my own caveat there is because we could debate as far as, like, does God move upon those who no longer who previously had no desire to create one, or does he perhaps was it like a pre-programmed kind of thing? Was it a list of what philosophers call subjunctive conditionals, where A, B, C, and D eventually led to E? So the only reason I say for sake of simplicity is to say we can ignore that particular conversation for now, as far as
Sure.
why or how God did it, and just say yes, God,
See,
in some
okay.
way, God has determined the intent to sell the brothers into
Okay.
slavery.
And then,
Um,
of course, you already know where I would go with it, right, CJ? Can you guess what my next response would be? Go ahead, take a guess. Take a guess.
yeah, wouldn't it would probably be something along the lines of, wouldn't that make God the author of their
Bingo!
desires?
That's
Yeah.
exactly that's right because uh Calvin in his institute, I can't remember, I have the quote, I can't remember which part of the institutes, but he says God moves on the hearts of men to do whatever he wills, whether to good for his mercy's sake or for evil for according to their merits. Um and I wholeheartedly reject that. Uh because that would make God the author of evil in my opinion. And then Calvin even goes on to describe he goes to the, I think it's the book of Proverbs, where God, like the hearts of the kings are like a river, and essentially God restricts the flow of water or something like that. But the problem with that is, st- they always flow downhill, right? Water by nature, that's what it does, it flows. Like it's not going to flow upstream, it always comes downhill. So when God uses that analogy, yeah, he can craft out a waterway for where the water runs, but he's not fundamentally changing what the water itself does. And so like this idea of like a foreign thought or evil desire, God or imposing it, on the stream to make it do something other than what it does. You see, like I reject this. It's so bizarre to me. Like I don't understand, and I know Calvinists claim like, like the Westminster, they say God has preordained whatever comes to pass, but neither is he the author of sin or offer violence to the will of the creature. Okay, I understand that's what the creeds and what you guys believe. But to me it doesn't logically make sense, because if God is actively moving on people's hearts to do wickedness like Calvin described, and like what you seem to be agreeing with by your understanding of Genesis 45, I don't understand how that doesn't necessitate that he is the authoring the evil for the people, right? So it would make him the direct author of sin, in my
well,
opinion.
and this is kind of why I say, my whole, for the sake of simplicity point, right, is there's actually dispute amongst Calvinists. Are we saying that God is going to uh, um, like move upon them to create desires that weren't already there, or has he like, for example, with the water, God is obviously the one who determines nature, right? So water flows downhill either because the
See, I don't
physics
agree
are
with that
grounded
either,
in.
CJ, but that might be a different conversation. But I don't believe God creates sinful natures. I believe it's just a natural product of the fall.
So and I to be fair, you would have to reject that, because if you didn't, at that point you essentially would be a Calvinist.
See, I forget what
But
is that what is it called, traducianism or something like that, where they believe the sinful nature is a product of reproduction between man and woman, not necessarily, it's not God creating each nature. Um,
yeah, and I feel like, if I remember correctly, that originated from Augustine.
did it?
Um,
Okay.
I think, I
See, but
don't
I
know if
have
I'm
a
right about that.
caveat though, because I don't believe in seminal guilt, right? Like I don't believe. I don't know. I don't want to get too off topic, but briefly, so I believe human beings are born with a sinful nature, but I don't believe that equates guilt. Um, and I don't believe God directly creates each sinful nature in human beings either, because I think that would also necessitate him being evil, the author of sin. So I believe that now the Bible doesn't explicitly explain how each human has a sinful nature. So either way, it's going to come down to philosophizing and making inferences. But I don't believe God directly creates each sinful nature. I just believe it's a natural byproduct of being born into a fallen world. Um,
Right, and so see, this is why I kind of wanted to, and maybe it's even inevitable. I guess we'll kind of see. But this part of the reason I was wanting to simplify is just to bypass that question
sure,
entirely.
that's fine.
Um,
Let's skip over that. You don't even
and
have to address how that doesn't make God the author. I was just telling you what my response would have been to that, the way you framed it. That's all.
yeah, and I certainly understand that. Um, but so how can we demonstrate from the text that God is determining
yes,
this to take place, right?
Right.
And I think there are two things that we can kind of point out. The first is the language that Joseph uses is active language, right? So what do I mean by that? Well,
okay,
allowing something is passive, right? In other words, if I have a kid, let's say he starts crawling around and he grabs some Play-Doh and I just don't do anything about it, but I watched him do it. I didn't actually do anything. I merely passively allowed that.
I'm sorry. Let's say let's say, well, okay, I'll use my dad and my grandpa as an example. My grandpa came down with emphysema, but he used to be a very heavy cigarette smoker, and things were very different in the 1970s. And
Right.
so my grandpa would give my dad a couple dollars, and he would tell my dad to walk down to the corner store to buy him a pack of cigarettes. He's like, Kyle, can you? And my dad's name is Kyle. Can you just go get me a pack of Cools? And he would hand my dad the money, and then my dad would go do it. Now, you could say my grandpa sent him to the store, right? Which is true in a way he did. He told Kyle, go get me a pack of Cools menthols from the corner store, and he gave him the money to do it. So in a sense, he sent him, but my dad he did it on his own volition. It wasn't determined like there was nothing forcing my dad to go do it. My dad could have told my grandpa, well, no, I'm playing right now. And my grandpa was a very nice guy. If my dad would have said no, he wouldn't have pushed the issue. But do you see where I'm getting with that? Like, it's not, so when the Bible uses that language, like God has sent me to, or whatever, it doesn't necessitate, it means like it's dictated or for, and I don't like using the word force because I know a lot of Calvinists don't agree with that form of determination, but I don't know any other words to use. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the major issue there, in my opinion, kind of is going to boil down to the fact that we're talking about a situation where Joseph doesn't have volition himself, right? And in other words, the sending has actually pretty much nothing to do with Joseph. It has everything to do with his brothers. Now he could have decided to reveal himself to Joseph in a dream and told Joseph to go that way, right? But the way it actually took place, the sending is an action that Joseph actually is not even involved in anything other than the fact that he is the sent individual. So essentially what we have here is we have a situation where Joseph is saying, God actively sent me here. Like it was his intention to have me here. But the mechanism we already know by way of reading Genesis 37, the mechanism by which he got here was what at least appeared to be the free will actions of other people who don't appear to be getting like some kind of vision or anything like that either, right? It's not like God came to Judah and said,
would you be willing to admit, like, but by the way, I just explained like the analogy with my grandpa and my dad, and we're reading this passage where God's saying like he was sent. You can't for sure say that the way I'm understanding that is wrong, right? Like it is a fair way to look at it. Would you at least give me that? Like it is plausible?
Well, to be honest, it would be difficult. And the only reason I say that is because like I was saying there,
let me word it this way then. Let me word it this way. Is it fair to say that you can't dogmatically prove that your way of looking at it is correct either?
I can say that, let's see. I guess the best way I could put it, which would be hopefully fair to what you're saying, is I would say it is reasoning to the best possible inference.
Right.
In other words, we could call this a form of induction. Deductive logic guarantees that the analogy is.
But is it fair? Like, do you think that the way I'm understanding it it's plausible? Like, it's not completely off the table, right? I mean, come on. Or would you just say no? Like,
I think it would be kind of difficult for me to agree there, to be honest. And the only reason I say that is because, like I said, what we have is a situation where the sending is on the part of God. He's the point number one that I think we would have to agree with just reading the text alone is God's plan was to get Joseph into Egypt. And it at least appears, this part I won't say we'd have to agree with, but I think it's very likely it appears he wanted to get Joseph into Egypt by way of slavery. Why does it appear that way? Well, because the way in which Joseph actually became the viceroy was not him waltzing in and saying like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Pharaoh," right? It was going to Potiphar and then going to prison and then talking to the baker and the butler and then the butler talking to Pharaoh. And you know what I mean? Like there seems to be deliberate steps here. So we have to agree that God deliberately wanted, it was part of his plan to deliberately send Joseph. I keep saying Joseph into Egypt.
Okay,
and we
so I
would
would agree it's part of God's plan that Joseph would be in Egypt. I agree, because God wanted to work around that. Where the caveat, where the disagreement is I don't believe that God has determined the actions of Joseph's brothers. I believe he foreknew what they would be, and he worked around it.
so
That's how I interpret, like, passages where, like, Romans 8, like, all things work together for good. It's not that God's determining to uh, guarantee certain things. It's that he's so powerful, he knows every action, and he has a counter measure to each action. He works around our genuine free choices for his purpose. And so I don't think it's necessary for him to determine all things. But anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And P, guy in the side chat, P, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even know if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, or what. But behave yourself and start making sense, because it's just incoherent babble. And if you keep it up, I'm going to have my mods put you on a timeout. Okay, so stop talking crazy or whatever you're doing. Sorry, go ahead, CJ.
No, totally good. So I think the issue there, like I said, it really boils down to well, there's two things. I haven't actually gotten to the second yet, but the first part here is just this language of send. It doesn't appear to me to allow for something, no pun intended, like passive allowance, because the sending is it's a affirmation that not only was it part of God's plan to get Joseph into Egypt, but that God took deliberate action to guarantee it would happen. But we already know that how it happened was the brothers. So it almost seems like, all right, if God took deliberate action to guarantee Joseph would be in Egypt, and the way Joseph went into Egypt was by the brothers selling him into slavery, then it appears God took deliberate action to guarantee that the brothers sold him into slavery. And I think what makes that worse is this second point where in Genesis 41, I believe it's verse 25, when Joseph's explaining the dreams to Pharaoh, he says, God has shown Pharaoh the thing he is about to do. The he in this instance being God, right? So if God didn't determine this, what we would have to kind of conclude, right, is God either A, planned for this famine to take place and just happened to get lucky that the brothers would do what they did, which of course nobody believes. Not no, maybe the
Yeah, I
open
was going to
theist
say,
does, but
like, I hope you're not trying to say that's my position, because that'd be a straw man.
right. Maybe the open theist believes that, but even they, I think, might take issue with that.
That's very complicated. See, there's this thing I still don't understand. Idol killer Warren McGrew, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand his position, because he holds this thing called dynamic omniscience. And when I say, so does that mean God has to learn things, like he doesn't know the future? And like he's guessing at things, and he keeps saying, well, no. He's like, I believe God knows all things that are possible to be known. And I'm like, okay, so how does that work then? Like, I don't understand, like, because he rejects the classical theist model that God exhaustively knows all things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's some sort of dynamic thing to it, and I still don't quite understand his position. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him one-on-one. He stopped by my channel a few months back. I was reviewing Drew's debate against Israel um, about determinism, and he was in the side chat, and I invited him to come on, because I would love to talk to him about that. Like, can you explain what this dynamic omniscience thing is to me, because I don't get it. But unfortunately, it's like, well, I don't have much time. I got to go to bed, and I'm like, okay. But so I don't even, yeah, I don't even understand the dynamic omniscience position, to be honest with you, because I guess there's different forms of it, and I don't get it. But, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things with them, just real quickly, I won't get too far off, but they don't believe the future exists. So since the future doesn't exist, it can't be known. Therefore, God can still be all-knowing and not know the future because he's knowing everything that it's possible to know, right? But technically speaking, you don't have to be an open theist if you believe dynamic omniscience. It's another one of those things, kind of like the compatibilism thing we were talking about earlier, where it's like, okay, by a strict technicality, I guess that's true, but for all intents and purposes, there's really no difference between dynamic omniscience and open theism.
Okay. Hey, quick question. It just popped into my mind based on what you just said there. And this is just strictly your opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion. Would you consider people that identify themselves as Calvinists or reformed, but deny compatibilism, would you still consider them Calvinists?
That's a good question. It's hard because from a classical sense, I'd have to answer no. Because guys like Beza and Luther and Calvin and Knox and etc. are all, when they get into the philosophy, they are quite clear that compatibilism is true. But
to be fair to that, though, Calvin did contradict himself about that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I wouldn't even necessarily, want to dispute that, at least not at the moment. So in that sense, it's like from a classical perspective, I'd have to answer no. But at the same time, it's technically compatibilism is not demanded by any of the 5 points, tulip. So it's like, it's kind of the same way I feel about Greg Kokel, where Greg Kokel denies determinism but accepts tulip. It's like that to me makes absolutely no sense. And I feel like you're certainly not what I mean when I say Calvinist. But I guess theoretically, I'm not the gatekeeper of Calvinism, and so I don't know if I'm allowed to say, Greg Kokel, you are not a Calvinist.
There's a guy online, CJ. I talk to him every now and then, but he's quite annoying because he's very bizarre. He used to be called Professing Preterist. He changed his YouTube name now to Truth and Telos Ministries, and he identifies as a hard determinist. He believes in the TULI of tulip, but he denies the P. He believes that you could lose your salvation because there's some people that God is determined to have a regeneration and then to die lost. So he's, I guess, a 4-point Calvinist and a hard determinist. So he doesn't even believe in compatibilism. He also doesn't believe that there's a literal Satan, that it's metaphoric language in the Bible. And he's also a full preterist. So all prophecies about Christ's return were fulfilled by 70 AD. Now, someone like that, right, that would agree with you that everything's determined. He believes in total depravity, irresistible grace, all this other stuff, but he denies perseverance of the saints. Would you consider this person a Calvinist?
I don't think I would. No, okay. I think, in fact, I used to call myself 4-point. I have gotten to the point where I don't think 4-point counts.
Wow. That's interesting. I talked to a guy that calls himself Coffee and Calvinism. And he made the same claim. He was like, oh, it's either 5 or nothing. If you're not a 5, you're not a Calvinist. And I'm like, whoa, that seems a little extreme. But okay.
Well, and I think the reason I would agree, because you have to have a sort of a minimum amount of what you can get rid of, right? So let me get, this is going to be a little off topic, but I think my position will at least make sense. There's a dispute amongst your kind of high church Calvinists and low church Calvinists, or if you wanted to put names to it, Presbyterian types and Baptist types, as to how much of classical Reformed theology can you reject and still be considered Reformed. And the reason that's a dispute is because Baptists are very often not confessional, although a lot of them are. Obviously, there's the London Baptist Confession, 1689, right? And Baptists are very often not creedal, and Baptists are very often not covenantal. And even when they are, they're never Paedo-Baptist. You can't, it's definitional. You can't be a Paedo-Baptist Baptist. That's the whole thing that identifies you as a Baptist, right? Is that you believe in believers' baptism. But Calvin was confessional, was creedal, was covenantal, was Paedo-Baptist. And so were Beza and Knox and all those other guys. I guess I can't say all of them because that was the whole dispute with the Anabaptists in the first place. And actually, that's a good note to bring up. This is part of the thing that you may have heard like Leighton Flowers say before. Well, it's not true all the reformers were Calvinists. What about the Anabaptists? And, you know, when guys like Leighton say that, what they're referring to is the fact that the high church Calvinist types persecuted guys like Anabaptists. But soteriologically, actually, Anabaptists were what we today refer to as Calvinists. They would believe in tulip, but they didn't believe in things like paedobaptism and stuff like that. Hence the reason for the persecution. So all of that is to say, in order to solve this dispute, you need to have a minimum level of what can you reject in order to be considered a
CJ,
Calvinist.
that's not necessarily true. Hugmeyer was an Anabaptist. He believed in libertarian free will. He didn't believe in the tulip.
So Hugmeyer in particular,
he was executed by the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, and Hugmeyer in particular, I'd have to look at some of the quotes you're referencing because that's not my reference guys like Jacob Amon, who ended up being the founder of the Amish, and Menno.
Okay.
What was his name? Menno. The guy he ended up giving his name to the Mennonites, but he's really considered kind of like the first major Anabaptist. I can't remember Menno something.
So and Hugmeyer had problems too because he believed in the Immaculate Conception of Mary, which is very interesting, right? Like, but I guess he wasn't Catholic enough for the Roman Catholic Church, and they executed him.
Well, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like a lot of them really were, right? It's like Tyndale wasn't really, he was proto Protestant, but he wasn't quite full on Protestant, and yet they burned him at the stake anyhow. So, you know, whatever. And the same thing with Jan Hus. But digressions aside, so the point in this whole dispute is to say you need to have a minimum level of what constitutes Calvinism. And for some, they would even say, I'm not a Calvinist. Some of those high church guys, not all of them, Doug Wilson and guys like that would still agree.
CJ,
Reformed Baptist.
I've heard people exclude certain people from being Calvinists because they don't hold to covenant theology. So, for example, Coffee and Calvinism actually talked about this. Like, you know, John MacArthur was he was a dispensationalist, and because of that, he was like, oh, he's not a Calvinist because he's a dispensationalist, and like no one should be listening to him. He shouldn't even be teaching. And I'm like, man, like, wow.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that, and I'm not a dispensationalist, but and that's why I say, right. So you have to have this minimum level.
Since when? I thought you believed that the tribulation was yet future, and you know all that stuff. You're no longer a dispensationalist.
No, I have had an evolution. I still agree with a lot of dispensationalist points. For example, a future tribulation and a future restoration of Israel, although I think national Israel has already been restored. I just don't think that I've come to discover that those things are not exclusive to dispensational theology. In fact, the Pilgrims, who were all Reformed Baptists, the Pilgrims all believed in a future tribulation. Well, that's not true. Half of the Pilgrims believed in a future tribulation. Another half of them were about post-mill.
So what other theology is there? Because like usually the future tribulation is exclusive to dispensationalism. Now, and then you have different kinds of dispensationalism. You have the hyper dispensationalists, which believe there's different gospels for different time periods, which I reject. But the idea of there's a future tribulation, a third temple, that the millennium hasn't happened yet, you know, that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is future. Those, as far as I know, that's exclusively dispensational.
Well, and actually, it makes sense that you think that, and I thought that for a long time as well. It's because that tends to be how it's framed in modern America, at least, is you have covenantal, which believes post-mill, essentially, or amill. Some of them are amill, but they're rare.
Right.
And then you have dispensational, which are your pre-mill, and some of them split to pre-mill post-wrath or post-wrath pre-mill, whatever, etc., all the pre's and posts. But actually, historically, because dispensationalism is super new. It's a Darby that kind of came up with the concept. But a lot of his ideas are actually significantly older than him. So, like, for example, the idea of a restoration of Israel. Virtually all of the Pilgrims, we're talking 300-400 years before Darby was born. So, which means 300-400 years before there was any dispensationalists. Virtually all the pilgrims believed in a national turning of ethnic Jews to Christ, as did Martin Luther at first. He eventually did not agree with that, but at first he did. And none of them are dispensationalists, right? So it seems historically the primary dispute was between amill, post-mill, pre-mill, and dispensational covenantal could fit into either of those. But eventually, as things evolved, it seems like people, for the most part, started to debate as if pre-mill meant dispensationalist and covenant meant either post or amill, with the heavier emphasis being on post-mill. But yeah, like the third temple is talked about by Irenaeus. The coming of a future antichrist is talked about by almost all the church fathers. None of those guys are dispensationalists. So that was kind of, and that's part of the reason why I've been going through a little bit of an evolution on it myself, is I have come to discover that that's not a view exclusively held by the dispensationalist groups. And I still have a lot of appreciation for that. I like John MacArthur, and I actually really like C.I. Schofield. I know he gets a bad reputation these days, but I can't for the life of me understand why. I think he's a great theologian. He gets stuff wrong, but so does everybody. But I don't think I quite agree with them. Mostly it's the dual covenant thing. I don't think there's a separate covenant for, I do believe that God is going to be keeping his word to the Jewish people. I think that they are still his chosen nation in terms of an ethnic group. And I understand I could probably be accused of bias on that, but we're going to put that to the side for now. But I think if a Jew is saved, they are saved through Christ, just like any other person. So I don't agree with the whole dual covenant thing. And that seems to be a prerequisite for being a dispensationalist, because that's the whole point of the dispensations, right? Is we're in a dispensation of the church, and then you move on to the dispensation of Israel, which was also what you had previously. So yeah, I can't really abide that. That doesn't sound like it makes any sense to me. And especially when you go as far as like guys like John Hagee would be like, don't even preach to Jews, because it's something God will accomplish in the future. It's like, okay, well, first of all, what about all those Jews that die before God accomplishes that? We just got to say, oh, well, sucks to be you. You're going to hell. Or are they saved by their works? And then at that point, now the gospel's like fundamentally compromised.
See, but that's
just
John Hagee holds to what's called the dual covenant theory, where Gentiles are saved by trusting in Christ alone, and Jews can still be justified by doing the law. And so, which I would argue is heresy.
completely, right? Totally.
I wouldn't call that, dispensationalism. I would classify that as a form of hyper dispensationalism. Much like Peter Ruckman or something, but Peter Ruckman didn't believe in dual covenant. But he believed like people in the past were saved by keeping the law, and then today we're saved by exclusively trusting the Messiah. And then he believes back in the tribulation, again, you'll be saved by works. And again, I think that's heresy too. And I would reject both of those, but I would definitely classify John Hagee as some form of hyper dispensationalist.
Yeah, and I even think that's fair. Yeah, and also I'll point out, since I'm still working through a lot of this, it's not impossible that 3 months from now you ask me about this again, and I actually have reverted back to my previous state just with some new additions. Because it's an ongoing process. But right now, at least, I would not self-identify as a dispensationalist.
So, fun fact, and then we can get back to talking about the Bible and stuff and passages. So years ago, when I was a baby Christian, like I had just got saved, like my first year or so, from time to time I'd listen to certain things on TBN, Trinity Broadcasting Network. I'd listen to Billy Graham sermons and stuff. And one time I fell asleep with the TV on. I think I was watching Billy Graham or something. And I remember in the morning, like as I was waking up, I was still half out of it. The TV was on, and I heard this utterly demonic voice. It sounded like it was like, but it wasn't just that, but it was actually words, like it was speaking word. And when I came to it, I'm looking at the TV, it was John Hagee, and he was sitting there preaching. I'm like, what was that? And I turned it off. I'm like, what was that? And then as I kept learning about more about what John Hagee believed, I found about this dual covenant thing, and I'm like, wow, this guy's a demon. I was like, maybe that was God showing me he's a demon. Like, I swear, like, you don't care if you guys don't believe me, but I heard like a demonic voice coming out of the TV when he was talking, and I was like, what the hell is that?
Well, and it is funny you mentioned that. I do happen to like quite a bit of, like I said, I still like Schofield. I still love MacArthur. Um, I think Billy Graham was fine. He was a little, watered down, but I don't think to the point of where I would condemn him.
Okay.
Certainly that was an error, but like I said, everybody's going to have one. I'm not going to kill him for it. Pat Robertson said a lot of good things. Pat Robertson said a lot of kooky things, but Pat Robertson also said a lot of good things.
Yeah.
And Left Behind is like one of my favorite fiction stories ever. I think it's great.
With Kirk Cameron,
Yeah.
the original one, right? Yeah, I like those too. Not that I necessarily completely agree with them, right? Because I question the pre-mill thing, or I'm sorry, not pre-mill, but the pre-trib rapture. I
Right.
question that. Oh, by the way, are you still pre-trib? Just curious.
Also kind of questioning.
Okay, yeah.
Kind of, I won't say yes or no, but it's being mulled over actively as we speak.
That's fair enough, and I'm not going to press you on it, CJ, because I don't have a definite eschatology either. I lean more pre-wrath. I see a lot of good arguments for it, but I don't have to dig my heels into that for sure. You know what I'm saying? However it happens, God's going to work it out. So,
Yeah, I tend to
if
agree
God,
with that.
if God, until then, if he decides to, show me or open my eyes to something I'm missing, great. But if not, well, that's okay.
Yeah, the point I was going to get at there is to say I do know, it's actually kind of similar. I look at dispensationalism very similarly to the way I look at Pentecostalism, which is I think as a general rule, Pentecostals are Christians. Again, general rule, because there's going to be wackos, and there's even offshoot cults.
What do you mean by Pentecostal, though?
Just your Pentecostal movement, charismatic types, right? Guys who are.
Well, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, that's not a good enough distinction. See, because I was part of the Pentecostal movement, but there's different forms of it. I was in the Assembly of God, and they are Christians, I would argue. They're Trinitarians, they're pre-mill, but then you have another large group of the charismaniacs, like the TBN people, the Benny Hinns of the world, and, they have all sorts of heresy.
So actually, if I could just stop you real quick, that's actually kind of where I was going with it. Is the reason I see them as like why I put them in a similar camp is because at point one, I think generally speaking, they're Christians, and again, very generally.
Well,
but point two, I think there's a lot of.
I disqualify oneness. Oneness Pentecostals aren't Christians. That's a cult. None of them. Nope, not saved.
Well,
if you deny the Trinity, you're not saved. Nope.
And I'll say too, I'll just kind of, because I have a little bit of a spiel on that myself. I think you probably know I used to be
God. You can't God can't be perfect if he's not expressing and experiencing love before the creation account. Like, think about that. If God is dependent on creation to have love, then he's not perfect. So God has to be multi-personal and self-relational. He has to be able to have love within himself, the Father, Son, and Spirit. It's the only thing that makes sense. But if you're going to deny, oh no, well, it's really just the Father, and then he becomes the Son and the Spirit, and he shifts modes and stuff. Well, no, you guys, that's garbage. No, your God's not perfect.
Well, and I'll even just set that to the side for the moment, just because I think that I have an ongoing thing with Nicholas regarding that. Nicholas is not a modalist, just to be clear. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm actually trying to intentionally be vague so that I don't open a can of worms. But the thing I was saying there is just that, like, I think, like I said, it's a general rule that I have about Pentecostals, but then also, much like the dispensationalist, I think there's a lot of wackos in the Pentecostal group, like the Benny Hinns and the Kenneth Copelands and Kenneth Copeland is a straight up, the amount of things I could say about that dude. that would probably get you demonetized, actually. And then the third point is I actually have a great deal of agreement with them, even though I'm not sure that, like, I can't identify myself as a Pentecostal, but I am a continuationist. So it's not
Really?
like I
didn't know that. You're a continuationist? Really?
Yes, sir. Actually, I'm surprised you didn't know that, because me and Graham had talked about that before.
This is another thing that boggles my mind. See, because part of me coming out of the whole Pentecostal thing was I was deceived into thinking I spoke in tongues. Like, you ever notice, like, they do, oh, we're going to do an altar call for you to be baptized in the Holy Spirit, brother. You come down and they put your hands on you. You know, and the person is subconsciously hearing what they're doing, and then they start mimicking it, and they go, hallelujah, hallelujah, you got it, brother. It's like, no, they didn't. Their subconscious mind, they're hearing your garbage, and now they're speaking the garbage. It's not actual words. That's not tongues. That's just incoherent babble. It's just making sounds. That's not how the Bible described tongues as actual language, not just gibberish. That's garbage. That's not the Holy Spirit.
Well, and actually, it's funny you bring that up. So I'm actually surprised you don't remember this. Me and Graham actually talked about specifically tongues.
I'm sorry, dude. There's been so many conversations. I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you're totally good. It's just I know that was. I mean, hell, me and Graham haven't been speaking terms with the exception of a couple weeks for 2 years now. So that was a long time ago for sure. Yeah. But yeah, we were, and I do tend to agree that it is a actual language. I just think that it still happens
because the Hindus or the Kundalinis do the same thing. You know, and if we're going to say, well, this is tongues, well, then the Kundalinis have the Holy Spirit. You know, they do the exact same thing. The exact same thing. No, that's not tongues. It's actual language. It's like you don't know Chinese and then you're fluently speaking Chinese, or any language you could put there. That's biblical tongues. It's not. You know what I mean? Come on, man.
Yeah, and even we could even say too, even if there was some kind of an unknown tongue that you spoke, the Bible does talk about there needing to be a translator. So somebody else would have to be getting some other kind of a gift that
it would have been unknown to the person. But I personally believe that if God is giving this gift of tongues, then whoever is there in the audience, there's going to be someone that actually knows that language, and God is giving you the ability to do that, to speak directly so that person can get it. Right. So I don't see any instance in scripture where someone's just speaking in tongues randomly for no benefit, like that no one there understands. Like, if God is giving you that gift, it's because there's someone that speaks that language, and he wants them to hear the message so they can understand the preaching.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think
this is the modern Pentecostal movement, though. It's just tons of different people, they're not even taking turns speaking. There's no translator. It's just everyone. It's like, I'm sorry, but you know, and Charlie Michaels accuses me of blaspheming the Holy Spirit and going to hell for this, but no, that's not speaking in tongues. That's acting like the pagans do, the Kundalinis. They just sit there, you know. It's not tongues. I'm sorry. It's not.
Well,
and then,
I wouldn't.
Yeah, my cousin went to well, I don't want to dox my location, but he went to a school that leans Pentecostal, right? It's a Christian charter school. And when they were teaching to speak in tongues, they were like, well, just say it. I tied my bow tie, you know, like really fast. Right. So it's like you're trying to train people to speaking fast and using words like I tied my bow tie, and then they would change it into something else, like I had a Honda, you know, and you start combining all these things together, and they're like, now you're speaking in tongues. That is so ridiculous.
Yeah, and you know, I can even say too, like, I think that a lot of that stuff ultimately can kind of boil down to there are just a lot of people who are very much not careful. And that goes not just for continuationists, but even, you know, like I said, dispensationalists, I find to be similar. I think you could say it about Reformed theology and provisionism. You know, there are people who they don't care to be careful. And so they're just going to go with the, you know, like, for example, you ever hear that guy, I can't remember his name right now, but the Hispanic fellow who talks about, like, You're not even saved if you're not a Calvinist.
Oh, Sonny Hernandez.
Yeah. So I mean, you certainly didn't get that from the Bible, and you definitely didn't get that from the Reformed Fathers either. So it's like you just made that up, basically.
You know
You know
what's
what I
funny?
mean?
John MacArthur said something similar, but not in those exact words. But
Well,
he called. Sorry.
his whole thing was he kind of took a page out of the Sproul book, right? Because Sproul has the joke about he says, "Are Arminians Christians?" and he says, "Yes, barely." And it's kind of a joke, but he's also trying to make the point that this is a serious issue, even though we ultimately are still brothers. It's not something like the difference between.
Well, I could play the clip for you. I have it. John MacArthur said that Christianity is the only true religion, and even all other forms of false Christianity think they have to contribute something to their salvation. And then he goes on to caveat what that means. You think you've contributed to your salvation by believing in Jesus. And he was going on arguing like, well, unless God irresistibly gives you the faith, you're earning your salvation. So John MacArthur, I don't even know if he did it subconsciously, but what he did was he condemned all other forms of Christianity other than Calvinism. He called it false versions of Christianity.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's kind of the same thing with Sproul, right? Where it's because I have a large deal of agreement with the sentiment as far as it does appear to me that that to be just frank about it, there's a level of glory robbing.
Glory robbing by believing?
But well, yeah, I think that
oh, CJ, that sounds so dumb to me. Like that's ridiculous. Oh my gosh.
Well, and it's probably something that would be better suited for its own, because it would be a topic unto itself, right?
Yeah.
But
oh my gosh.
It is something that I think would be largely true in the sense that, but anyway, I don't know. I don't want to get too deep into that just because, like I said, that could be like a whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's as far as Arminians and provisionists and etc. Provisionism can be weird though. Here, I got to be honest, man. That really depends on the provisionist you're talking about, because a lot of provisionists just straight up are Pelagian. Even Leighton was like, he's weird with it, man. Like he'll try to go as far as he can to be like, well, the Pelagian issue isn't even really an issue. I actually remember one of the times, speaking of Graham, you and Graham were doing a video based off of some of the work that Leighton had done. And I had to come in, I don't know if you remember this, but I had to come in and be like, guys, we have like letters that Pelagius wrote himself. This is not a disputed issue. Leighton just doesn't know what he's talking about. And I showed you guys where Pelagius was essentially arguing that mankind starts as a blank slate. We're not actually slave to sin, and we have the capacity to live out our lives in a righteous way. We inevitably choose not to. Even with
if it's inevitable, then that means it can't be done.
Well, and that's one thing with Pelagius too, where it would be kind of weird, right? Because in a lot of ways, he would even kind of contradict himself in that regard, because he seems to be arguing as if it is possible. I'll have to show you the letter again, and I'm sure Graham remembers, because it was kind of a moment where
was he arguing that it was hypothetically possible?
No, he was arguing it in the letter that he's referencing. He was not only arguing it was possible, but he was admonishing a specific, I think she was a princess.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I remember reading that. Yeah. I think that's his only work we have. All the other ones were like burned by the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, and then you'll have guys like, which to be fair, I'm not saying you should go burn stuff. Like, like Kenneth Copeland's a heretic. Don't burn it. I'd like to know what he said. That way I can refute it. But, but like, yeah, and then you'll get guys like Leighton, and he'll try to.
An idiot that he believed faith is a good work, and because of that stupid assertion, Augustine agreed with him. Faith is a good work, and that's where the idea of God has to irresistibly give it to you, so therefore it's not a work, came from. Like, then that's where Smokey gets caught up. Faith is a good work.
But you see then the point I'm making though, right? Where it's like, so then you have like, and I love Leighton, man. I know Leighton well. We're on a first name basis. He's a good guy, but he goes out of his way to try and like defend Pelagius but then you'll be like, well, so are you saying that you're a Pelagian? He's like, no, I'm not. It's like, well,
Well, no,
you
I
argue
think
like one.
well, what Leighton is doing is that all the things that he has claimed to have taught, we can't definitively prove all those things because his works were destroyed.
Yeah, and I can even grant the sentiment, but I think that
I mean,
you
because
almost
let's
have
be
to be
fair.
conspiratorial with that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, we have Augustine's works. Like I have all this Augustine stuff, where Augustine's claiming things that he supposedly said or taught, but we have no actual evidence that that's true. All we have is what Augustine said. We don't actually have all those writings where he, supposedly said those things because they don't exist anymore. All we have is that one letter, like you were talking about, where he wrote to I don't know if she was a nun or something.
she might have been a nun. I for some reason I'm thinking princess, but it could have been a nun.
Yeah,
It might even have been both, like a royal member who became a nun.
I don't know.
Um,
I don't know. Just a
but
bunch of Roman Catholics squabbling.
even with the thing with Augustine, right? It's like, well, Jerome also does write a little bit about it, and we have different council decisions that varies. In fact, one of the councils, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but Augustine wasn't even there, and it ended up ruling that Pelagius was a heretic. Now he did correspond with them. It's not like he was entirely unaware of it's happening or anything like that, but he's not actually there at the council. It's like the third one, because there's one that declares Pelagius fine, and then there's one that declares him a heretic, and then there's a third that declares him a heretic again, affirming the second. And whether or not you take that seriously, obviously, Scripture is the ultimate guide. But the point of bringing up the councils is just to say, when Leighton and that guy who wrote What Love Is This, and the guy who wrote about
Dave Hunt. Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah, Dave Hunt. Like, but when they all claim that this is all like the manufacturing of Augustine, it's just not historically viable. It's possible it's true, but given the evidence we have, it's super unlikely, especially considering that Pelagian letter. You know what I mean? And then you have other provisionists like Warren McGrew, for example, who's not only on top of being an open theist, he just
CJ,
is a Pelagian.
Well, CJ, let's break this down to the practical. Let's say 100 years from now, all we have left, let's say we only have one video of you, teaching some aspect of Calvinism. And 100 years from now, that's all that exists is that one video. And there's other people that are claiming that CJ completely denied free will, and they also say a bunch of other things that you wouldn't necessarily agree with. But we have no way to prove, like, well, did CJ actually teach and believe those things? Because all we have is this one video he did where he affirmed, like, this, he was talking about this one point of Calvinism. It's like, well, yeah, and they were arguing that that's how it was, right? We have this one letter from Pelagius where he doesn't get into all that, and then all we have to do is trust what Augustine had to say about everything else he believed. So I mean, I think it's fair. It's not defending Pelagius per se. It was just saying, well, we can't prove definitively, exactly everything he taught on all these different issues.
And like I said, I understand the sentiment. I think the issue with things like that is, number one, it has to necessarily involve a grand conspiracy because of all the other records besides Augustine. But number two, it's also just kind of the way that history has to be done, because of the fact that, we don't have like the extant writings, I don't want to say this. We don't have the full extent of everybody's writings extant ever. Right? Like, there are some writings of Augustine that are missing, that we just can't find them because he wrote so much. There are some writings of Jerome that are missing. There's not a single writing from Valentinius, the kind of first big Gnostic.
Yeah.
Or same thing with Marcion. Like, we just have to take the church fathers' word for it that Marcion believed that the Old Testament God and the New Testament God were different beings. Now, the fact that there's so many witnesses against him leads me to believe they're telling the truth. But we don't actually have a Marcionite text, you know what I mean? So, or a Valentinian text, or I don't know if I feel like we do have a text from Manny, but I don't remember off the top of my head if we have a text from Manny or not.
There's a couple of manuscripts they have. from Manny.
Yeah, I thought so.
He changed his position later in life, so the two manuscripts don't agree with each other. But we have two manuscripts that came from Manny himself. Yeah, they still exist.
That's what I appreciate you confirming, because I remember having heard that, and then I was
there's a Wikipedia article on it, and they get into it, and they even give the names of the manuscripts and like what they teach. It's interesting. It's some weird stuff. But yeah, I mean that's a fair point you made. That's fine. That's a fair point. As far as Warren being a Pelagian, though, as far as I can tell, him and JP Uncut did a live stream about the sinful nature thing, and they agree that humans have sinful natures, but they just don't believe that they're born with it; that it develops in them over time. So, would you still consider that a Pelagian?
That would be. I think that would probably be, if that's, and I'll have to watch that for myself. But if that's what he said, I think that would be more semi-Pelagian, because you're saying we start as a neutral slate, which is the kind of key aspect of Pelagianism, but you're still nevertheless agreeing that it does ultimately develop in all persons, hence the necessity for grace. So semi-Pelagian, yes, if that's what he said, but I don't think that would be full-blown.
Well, I mean, because by that definition, I guess you would consider me a semi-Pelagian, even though I'd reject the label. I think I'd probably fall into that category too, because I deny that we're guilty of Adam's sin, but I believe we have a sinful nature.
I'd have to get your thoughts on it more succinctly, but from what you just described, yes, I think I would, because the basic idea behind semi-Pelagian thought is basically that we don't have a sin nature in the sense of an inherent born with nature that is inherited from Adam. Right. So given that distinction, I think I probably would, but we can discuss that at another time as well. Right. Because
I'm not denying that the sinful nature exists. I'm just saying that, children aren't guilty until they're, they have the mental capacity to understand right and wrong. It's like I believe they're born with a sinful nature, but they're not held accountable for it, and they become guilty once they sin upon their sinful nature or acting on it.
You probably would not agree with something like federal headship, then, right? Like that we are.
No.
Okay. All right. I'm actually not going to say anything because I noticed that John's here.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you guys because I was enjoying the combo, by the way. But I think that is one of the essentials of Pelagianism, though, a denial of federal headship. That doesn't necessarily mean you're a full-blown Pelagian or anything, but it's definitely a component of Pelagianism. And so I would be careful, brother. Obviously from one perspective.
Well, because if I accept that Adam represented all of us, and because he sinned, we're born guilty of his sin. I would, if I accepted federal headship, I'd have to take the view that I'm guilty of Adam's sin. But I don't see the scripture teaching that I'm guilty of his sin, so I have to reject that idea.
Yeah, well, and so let's break this down a little bit, and you can tell me whether or not you agree with these. So, Pelagians would hold that the nature just simply is not tainted by sin, and so therefore nobody is actually guilty of sin unless they do it, and also they have the capacity to not actually sin.
Okay.
Even though inevitably I shouldn't say inevitably, they more than certainly come on, Jay, word this correctly. They more than likely will. That's what I'm trying to say. So you probably would disagree with that, am I right?
Yes.
Okay. So then the semi-Pelagian is kind of compromising, where they're kind of saying, and let me pull up an exact quotation of it so I don't say this wrong. Let's see, where's a good point to get on it, because I also don't want to quote somebody who's attacking it. That way I can be as fair as possible.
That's why I just reject the label. I think it's not a good term, right? Just saying someone's semi something really isn't dealing with the issue. It's like saying someone's semi-Roman Catholic. Well, what? I mean, you either are or you aren't. You know what I mean? Like, whatever.
But to be fair,
Okay,
though, there are
so
different types of Pelagianism. There's different types of like compatibilism and stuff like that. So it's not as black and white as that. To be fair.
So I couldn't find a quote fast, and I don't want to waste your time. So this is what the Wikipedia article says on semi-Pelagianism, which I think is largely accurate. So I'm going to use it. Both God and the human person always participate in the salvation process. Humans make free will choices, which are aided by God through creation, natural grace, and supernatural grace, as well as God's restrictions on demonic invasion. But God continually brings that person to real choices, which God also aids in the process of spiritual growth to be saved. You're on mute, Kevin.
Yep. I didn't say anything because I didn't hear a question.
Oh well, so what I'm asking basically is, do you agree with this?
I don't know. The way that was worded was weird. I don't think I even fully get what was going on there.
All right. Let me read it one more time. If you still don't get it, we can just move on, because I honestly, there are better quotes than this. Like I said, the Wikipedia article is only really, it's largely accurate, but it could be a lot better. And I just don't want to waste time looking for a direct quotation.
No
All right. So here it is.
Yeah.
Both God and the human person always participate in the salvation process. Humans
I
make
disagree
free.
with that.
Okay. So then off the bat, you would have a issue with the way that's worded, right?
The way I'd parse it out is I'd say God decides to save those that believe, but I don't believe that actually putting our faith in Jesus contributes to our salvation. I believe that salvation is something that happens after we've believed, and it's entirely of God. Humans don't have the ability to manipulate spiritual matter. We don't have the ability to impose a new heart within ourselves. We just submit to God and humbly admit that we're sinners and we need his grace, and then he saves us. So I don't believe that I contribute to my salvation. No.
Okay. So I think that in the classical sense, I know in the modern sense you might dispute the word, but in the classical sense, I think you might just be more classically synergistic than semi-Pelagian.
Well, and I reject that label too, but
yeah, and I guess it's probably best
a
not
lot
even
of
to get into
times,
that, right? Because that's the whole thing.
You know, Calvinists use the synergism thing to accuse you of earning your salvation. So I don't even play around with it.
Yeah, and that's where I would think that, there's different types of synergism. There's the meritorious synergism of Roman Catholicism, where they're saying
And
that they
Smoky Saint.
contribute to the salvation,
Yeah,
that type of
actually.
thing. And then,
See, Smokey is literally a synergist. Literally.
yeah, but he's on the meritorious side, whereas there's a non-meritorious volitional synergism, where it's the human will cooperating with divine will
You know why I don't like that,
to
John?
accomplish salvation.
I still don't like that because both people get called a synergist. So it's not a good enough distinction because I don't like being lumped in with heretics. You know what I'm saying?
Hey,
You
real
can,
quickly, guys. My phone is about to die, so I'm gonna have to hop off here. Actually.
Thanks for coming,
Okay.
CJ. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate talking to you.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure, man.
Absolutely, and good to see you as well, John. God bless, guys.
You too, brother. But yeah, I would just say that, even though you reject the label, I do think that the concept still
Charles.
applies in my personal opinion. But
Well, and you're entitled to your opinion, but with all due respect, I just reject the label altogether just to avoid confusion because I don't want to be in the same category as a Roman Catholic or a Jehovah Witness or a Seventh-day Adventist or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Because all the cults
I understand.
yeah.
I'm just comfortable with making appropriate distinctions within that, but that's just my perspective, though.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be having a debate on compatibilism?
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
Who are you
most likely
debating?
two. Puritan fan. I've debated him before about does regeneration
Okay.
precede faith, And I'm supposed to also have a debate on this very topic with Nicholas Whitmire, that calls himself proclaimer of Jesus Christ, or I'm sorry, proclaimer of Messiah. And me and him actually used to be friends and fellowship together, and he kept more and more getting into the Calvinist thing. And the more he did, I was like, well, I don't agree with that. And he sent me emails, essentially, if I don't agree with the doctrines of grace, I don't believe the gospel. Um, and essentially, I'm not saved because I reject Calvinism, and so he doesn't really talk to me anymore. And that's unfortunate because I like Nicholas. There's a lot of times we had really good discussions about different things, but the more, because we hung out for about a year or so, and then he started talking about determinism, and I was like, "Oh, are you a Calvinist?" Because originally he didn't really, get into it too much, but yeah, it turns out he actually
Yeah.
was, and he wanted me to agree with that, and I was just like, "Well, I don't," and now I'm apparently not saved, so he doesn't hang out with me anymore.
Yeah. I would classify them as hard Calvinists.
But he claims he's a compatibilist.
Well, um, in terms of the soteriological question of
Yeah.
what you need to believe to be a Christian,
Yeah.
they would be hard Calvinists because they're the ones saying that Calvinism as a concept is one of the necessary requirements
Right.
to be a Christian.
Right.
I don't agree with that. I've made videos against it in the past. It's blending soteriology with the gospel. I don't think those two things go together. So that's where I think he's
Yeah.
inappropriately doing that.
See, and I recently got into this with Graham too, because he was like, "Well, how do you separate soteriology from the gospel?" Right? Because when you're talking about soteriology, you're talking about the study of salvation. You're explaining how salvation
Yeah,
happens, right? And it's like, I was like, well, because that gets into like systematic theologies and how you think these things happen. Like, I think there's a certain amount of ignorance you can have with certain things and still be a Christian. Like, as long as you understand that Jesus is God, he died on a cross, he rose again, and then you're saved by faith, not by your works, I think that's enough, right? You don't have to thoroughly understand exactly how all these things work, right? Like what atonement theory is correct. Like, was it penal substitutionary? Was it Christus Victor? Was it whatever other thing, and like how exactly did Christ die for our sins? Like, or, how did that work? Like, because they'd all agree it was on the cross, but then they parse it out differently. And it's like, does that really
right.
matter? In the sense of like an eternal salvation kind of thing. Not necessarily.
Yeah, I do think there's some limitations to that, but generally, yeah. I typically use the analogy of like um, someone who has to have heart surgery,
Mhm.
and then when they are finally awakened from the surgery, they have a misconception about how the surgery was performed, and they're like, uh, "I want to sue the surgeon because he used a pin instead of using actual surgery equipment." He misunderstood how the surgery happened,
Right.
but that didn't change that he was healed.
Right.
You know
Right.
that he
Right.
was changed,
Right.
and so yeah, that was a primary thing of my first debate actually,
Really?
versus Ray Fuentes. It was on is Calvinism demonic and heretical,
Okay.
and his claim was all the way to the degree of if you're not a provisionist, you're not a Christian. He was the other side
Okay.
that blends the provisionist systematic so that
I have a
if
question
you
for you.
agree with
So,
it,
John, for
you're
so either side of the aisle, like, so if someone's claiming their systematic theology is the gospel, do you think that person's actually a Christian?
I I would say that I'm concerned and that I would pray for them, but
Okay.
I would have a distance from them out of caution because it it shows a misunderstanding of the gospel when they do that. And so I'd pray for them. I would gently encourage them to, go over the gospel passages,
Because
because
people can't
they're
separate
misunderstanding.
how, like, for example, Like, someone's a limitarian, like Nicholas is. He believes that God, that Jesus Christ only died for the elect, right? And then you have people like me, that I believe that God actually died for the whole world, but that doesn't equate universalism. I would go to passages like 1 John 2:2. Now, someone on the other side of like, well, you're denying the gospel. You see, because they're like, well, Jesus says he died for the sins of the world, and you're saying, well, he didn't, so you have a false gospel. And it's like, well, do you have to understand that Jesus died for every individual, or do you just have to understand that he died for you? Like, is it, what I'm saying? Like, how accurate do you have to understand these things in order to be saved?
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
that's why I generally just stick with what Jesus said you have to believe. Like John chapter 8, where he says, "Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins."
Right.
That's a specific condition that he says if you don't do that,
Right.
you're not saved.
Right.
But I typically stick with those things. That he is God, that he lived a sinless life, he was born of a virgin, um, and that he was died on the cross, and that he rose again on the third day. And so, if you believe those
Well,
things, then I
well, I would
believe
I would add one more
that
thing to
you're
that. Um, because I think the Bible makes it clear that we're justified by faith and not by works.
yeah, faith
Because
alone.
like a Roman Catholic would affirm all those things that you just said, right? That he is God, he died, he rose again, but they add the sacraments and things like that. And so I think that would disqualify them as being Christian, like they're not Christians. So this is
Yeah,
where it gets really complicated, because if you're going to 1 Corinthians 15, it tells you this is the gospel, right? And it lays out how Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, how he was buried, and he rose again according to the scriptures. But it doesn't say that it's not of works in that passage. It just says this is the gospel that ye have received and wherein ye stand. Right. But then when you go to other places like Romans 4 and Ephesians 2, it makes it clear that it's not by works, but by faith.
yeah. So what I would do in that case is go
Yeah.
to the book of Galatians,
Hmm.
because there he actually does confront this as a false gospel. He
True.
says,
Yes. Yes, he does.
um,
Yes.
"You you're being so quickly to be deserted from the gospel I preached to you," and then he proclaimed it as those who are trying to be justified before God by faith and by circumcision. Trying to blend aspects of the law into their justification. And so there you see the principle. You can't add anything to faith. It's only by faith alone. So when someone adds to faith, they are committing the same false gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's fair. And I agree with that. Um, however, I believe the Galatians were actually saved when they did that, but um, yeah.
Yeah, me too. I just think that um, their Paul was commanding them to turn back to the true gospel, and
Yeah,
to uh,
works.
not to desert the gospel that was proclaimed to them. You know,
Yeah, right,
but yeah, I would agree with you on that.
for sure. Um, yeah, I'm sorry it took so long to get to you, John. Is there anything you wanted to contribute to the things that were said before I move on? Because I was going to read from this book, The Allure of Incompatibilism. There's a section called the consequence argument I wanted to read, see how that is. But before I do that, is there anything you wanted to say or whatever?
I'll just say this, just as an encouragement to you, and then I'll let you go ahead and read this and everything, because I still have some things I need to do around the house. Uh, I gotta clean the whole house here before I
Yeah.
go and get my wife and everything. So yeah,
How's the married life going, man? You enjoying the Philippines, or you miss the U.S.?
both. I'm
Oh,
enjoying the Philippines. It's a huge blessing. Especially getting to have married life with my wife and everything.
Dude,
do
I
miss
gotta ask, how large is the Christian community down there? Like, is there a lot of Christians down there or no?
um depends on how far you want to branch Christian, but there's
Well, you know what I
primarily
mean. I'm
Roman Catholic.
excluding Roman Catholic, Eastern
Yeah,
Orthodox, stuff like, you know what I'm saying?
primarily Roman Catholic, but there
Okay,
is a
okay.
good Christian community out here, amongst Reformed, Provisionists, Independent Baptists, and all them. You know, that type of thing.
I would usually consider Independent Baptist provisionists, even though they don't use the label. They essentially preach the same thing.
Yeah, they really want to stray far away from those labels, man. It's
I used to go to an Independent Baptist church. And I like them. They're a really charismatic group of people. They really are. The only thing I can't stand is like 99% of Independent Baptist churches are King James idolaters. They're always
oh
propping up,
yes,
this is the inspired word of God. It's like, really? Did Paul write
yeah.
English? Did the prophet
the
David write English? Like, come on,
the
guys.
Anderson
Seriously?
folks.
Like, golly. That's the
Yeah,
biggest turnoff for me. It's like, I love everything else, but it's like, why? Why do we have to put this an English translation up like, this is what's inspired? Like,
yeah.
how? Like, it was preserved back then, thousands of years ago. God didn't have to wait
Exactly.
until 1611.
Exactly.
Gee,
And
I don't
we
get it.
primarily don't have the 1611. We
Oh,
we have like the revisions of it published
yeah,
way
I
after.
know.
So,
Uh,
but that was actually the first church I went to after the Church of Christ. After I got out of the Church of Christ,
oh,
I went to a Grace Baptist Church.
oh, okay, okay.
They were an independent fundamentalist Baptist
Man, you
church.
should have stayed there, John. Because
Brother, they didn't want me,
then
man.
you got brainwashed and duped into Calvinism. You should have stayed with the Independent Baptists, man. Seriously.
Oh man.
Even though
But
they probably believe the King James was inspired, right?
yeah, there's
Yeah.
that and the sinner's prayer. The
Oh, okay.
1, 2, 3, repeat after me, and
See,
you're good
I'm
to
not
go.
opposed to using the sinner's prayer as long as you tell the people it's not the prayer itself that saves you. It's if you actually mean from your heart and you understand that you're a sinner and you want God to save you. It's
Yeah,
not the prayer itself that saves. That's why I usually don't do the sinner's prayer.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it per se, but
Yeah.
the way that they were doing it was that they were using it as a means of assurance
Really?
to the struggling Christian. I
Oh
had a brother of
no.
mine in the church who was like, I'm I'm failing in all of these attributes, like that First John is talking about. I can't trust God enough. I can't love God enough. I can't love my
Well,
fellow
here's the
neighbor.
thing: no human ever can. Even as a saved person, I can never trust God enough. I can
I know,
never
I
meet
know.
up to any of these standards. Like, oh, people.
And it's like I'm doubting that God exists. I'm doubting
Oh,
his resurrection. Pastor, help me. And he's like, did you say the sinner's prayer? And he's like, yeah. He's like, did you mean it when you said it? Yeah. Then don't worry about it. God is your savior. Don't worry about it. You're his son. Just sing the psalms, sing the worship songs until you believe it. You know
no, see,
that
because
that bothered me, man.
man,
That bothered me too much.
that's not good advice.
Yeah,
No,
that's the first thing that led me out of the IFB, and
gotcha.
then
No, to be
eventually I
fair,
became
not
a.
not all independent Baptist churches are like that, John. Just so you know.
Yeah, I know, but I just got a bad steaming taste of
Yeah.
garbage in my first experience. But
And that's fair. I mean, no matter what denomination you go to, there's going to be some churches, that are kind of bizarre and certain things like that. But there are a lot of good independent Baptist churches out there. There are.
yeah, but overall out here, man, I'm enjoying it. You know, Filipino life is very different,
Okay.
and I'm slowly becoming more and more Filipino. Even my skin, brother, it's turning dark, man, because of the sun. The sun
How are
is
their
scorching me,
laws? Like,
brother.
because are the laws a lot different than the U.S.? Because I'm biased, right? Like, I think this is the best country in the world. We're the freest country in the world. I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to live anywhere else just because of that. But I mean, are the laws fair so far down there? Or are you still not learning? Like,
Uh, The Philippines is rough, brother.
Is it?
Especially with the traffic enforcement and everything.
Hmm.
They are very bad at controlling traffic and holding people accountable. There are so many motorcycles just driving on the sidewalk,
Oh wow.
running people over,
Oh wow.
and not getting fined for it. Like it's really bad, bro. That's why you really got to be careful when you're out here. And uh, it's better if you have your own car, but not enough money yet.
Wow.
But yeah, it's not the worst, but the Philippines is under judgment, in my opinion,
Okay.
from the fact that they're following the West in the LGBTQ community, and they're slowly embracing it. Not good, man. Not good.
No.
So the Philippines needs prayers too.
Yeah.
But yeah, besides that, I just want to let you know, brother, I will be praying for you on your debate, and I am praying for you in your sanctification as well.
And for my surgery, please.
Mm, okay. You're having hand surgery?
Yeah.
Or what?
Yeah.
Mm,
I explained that at the beginning of
so-
the stream. Uh, yeah, I got a cyst that's growing out of my joint, and it's gotten
I,
quite large to the point where I can't make a fist on this hand. Like I don't know if you could tell, but see how
I,
it's so big. It's like that. That's all a big cyst.
I,
It's huge. Um,
I,
I can't I can't make a fist because I can't bend it enough, and like it's very sensitive. Like it's very easy to cut it or pop it, and like blood and like this the the gel the body produces to lubricate the joints comes out of it. Right. So it
I,
started off as for some reason my body, I don't know why, but for some reason my body was trying to push the fluid from the joint out towards the surface of the skin, and it collected in like a pocket underneath my skin. And eventually
yeah,
it got so big to where the skin split and the cyst started just popping out of the skin. And
yeah,
so now it's this big fleshy mass filled with joint fluid and blood. And I've accidentally cut it numerous times. I've accidentally got a cut on something and actually ripped it off, and that hurt like crazy. And it grew back even
I,
bigger.
yeah,
Um,
and
yeah,
been there, done that,
really.
but on my toe.
Oh, on your toe. Yeah.
Yeah, my big toe, brother. It was right underneath the toenail,
Oh,
so
so it's
I
lifted
had
up
to
the
get
nail.
that thing removed. Yeah, I had to get
Oh
the whole
man.
nail removed,
Uh,
and
ugh.
that was horrifying, brother. That was horrifying. And it didn't help
What?
that I had to watch them do it. Like, yeah, you don't want to go through that. But I'm sorry you're going through that, but that sucks, bro. My
It
goodness.
it does. It does. But I'm not. I'm trying not to let it slow me down. I'm still trying to figure out ways to work out without having to grip. Because I love to use free weights and like chest and back day. When you're doing your the pull downs. You have the bar you grab and you do the pull downs. I
Yeah,
can't. I can't. I can't grip the bar with this hand. So now I'm trying to find other machines, and it's it makes it a little bit more difficult because I can't do my typical routine that's been working for me. But
yeah,
I'm still trying. I can't wait. My surgery's on the 24th, so I can't wait for it just to get it over with because this has been
mm,
going on for months. But it's just gotten so big now to the point where I can't even grip the bar. So
yeah. I'll put that down in my notes so I can make sure I pray for you on that day.
I appreciate that.
Uh,
Um, the universe galaxy. Hey, you guys looking for debaters? Then, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is a debate preparation video. So I have a debate on compatibilism coming up, and the whole point of this was I'm just prepping for it. And a couple of people joined, and I've kind of got sidetracked a little bit, but I don't know. I've never seen you before. Are you a Christian? Like, what's going on here?
yeah, it's easy to get sidetracked in these conversations,
Oh,
man.
for sure,
Don't
man,
worry
for
about
sure,
that, brother.
for sure.
But
Um, yeah,
yeah, we will definitely be praying for you on that, and
appreciate it.
know that if I've ever come across like unkind to you, please forgive me. because that's never been my intention. Um, we just are very passionate about our disagreements, man. That's really what it is, and I'm fine with that. It's fine to passionately disagree as long as we are gracious about it. You know, so I am very grateful to you about that for sure.
Well, I don't think it's good enough just to disagree. I think there should be an earnest and an actual desire for truth, right? Because
Yeah,
look, at the end of the day, if you're just out there winning discussions and stuff. Well, it doesn't really mean anything if you're wrong, because I mean, you can win an argument and still be wrong. It just means you're better at
yeah,
talking, right? Like, so what matters is if we're Christians, we should be seeking out for what is God actually said, right? Like, not how we're interpreting, but what does this actually mean and what's most consistent with the whole theme of the text. And
I
all
agree.
Christians should be doing that. And if we're just sitting here like, no, I can't be wrong, well, it's like I think you have the wrong attitude. Right. Of course, it's possible you're wrong. There's certain things that we can't be wrong about. The scripture makes it quite clear, like the deity of Christ. He died. He was crucified on a cross, not on a pole.
Yeah, the essentials. Yeah,
Exactly. But like the timing of the rapture and all this other stuff. Yeah, it's possible we could be wrong about those things. And so we can't be so dogmatic. Um, and be open to hearing different perspectives. And see, the reason I reject Calvinism is because I gave it a fair shot and I talked to Calvinists, and when they present me with the passages, I can see, well, there's these alternate interpretations that seem to make more sense with this passage over here and this one over here. And there's certain verses I see where you guys can come away with this type of thinking, but I don't think it flows with the rest of the whole theme of Scripture. I think it actually makes Scripture contradict itself in numerous areas. So that's how I've reasoned where I'm like, okay, I reject that. But I'm still open if there's something I've missed that I
yeah,
wanted to be shown, right? Like I don't want to get to the point where I'm so sure about everything that I'm just not even open to correction at all, because I don't think
yeah.
that's a good place
Arrogance.
to be. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've never want to get there too. That's why I always pray for humility. I always pray that the Lord would uh, give me the patience to be able to listen quickly and to be slow to speak. All those things.
Yeah,
That's one thing the Lord has taught me since I came here, to the Philippines. Especially because I have some nephew and niece who are very, very naughty. They love to mess with me all the time. So God is definitely testing my patience with them. But I'm very grateful that God uses these things to sharpen each other, to help us grow, and more importantly to keep us united in the midst of our disagreements. And that's what I can appreciate about stuff like this. Because even though we disagree, and we're both willing to be wrong, but we're both willing to recognize at the end of the day we're Christians. You know, we serve Christ, and we want to honor Him in the way that God has given for us to do that. So sorry about my voice, man. I have an AC upstairs that's making my throat very dry, so it's my throat's kind of scratchy right now. But yeah, I appreciate you for letting me on, brother. Uh,
no worries.
um, I will let you go ahead and do your reading and everything.
Okay.
But I'm grateful for you, brother, and I will be looking forward to that debate. When's the debate happening, by the way?
The 8th of next month. It'll be on Standing for Truth's YouTube channel. But I will also be re-uploading it to my channel as well. I'll probably premiere it the next day or something.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will mark that on my calendar, and I will be in the chat, brother.
Okay. Yeah, you're gonna be rooting against me, right? Bashing me in this chat. Yeah.
Hey, I will do my best to be fair, brother. I love Turrican Finn,
Mhm.
although I will say that at times I do think he could he could have sharpened his arguments.
What blew my mind? So
What's that?
when I debated him on does regeneration precede faith, in his opening statement, he was trying to use the book of First John to make a distinguishment between saved versus unsaved. And I'm like, what is this guy doing? Because First John's written to Christians. It's talking about having Christians walk in the light rather than walking in darkness. So that was a fellowship issue, not a salvation. Like, and he did that, like conflating these things to make his point in his opening statement. It blew my mind. I'm like, why is he doing that? Like, he doesn't understand the First John. I'm like,
Yeah,
wow.
I think I understand what he's trying to do.
Yeah.
He's trying to make a case from personal Christian assurance to it's a salvation issue because First John 5:13 says that he has written
You
these
can know.
things to them so that you can know that you have eternal life. And however you take eternal life determines how you interpret the rest of the book. Because it's the rest of the book is to tell you how you can have, or how you can know that
Know
you
you
have
have
eternal
eternal
life.
life. Yeah, yeah,
Not
yeah. Right.
how to get eternal life, but how to know that you have it. And so I think he's trying to make a case from that to these are essential elements of a Christian. Therefore, if you don't have them, then you are not a Christian. You can't have assurance of
Did
it.
you did you see that debate, John, that I had with him on that issue?
Brother, I've missed so many debates since I came
Ah,
here. I've been so busy trying to fix my marriage license and everything, but I'm trying to catch up, man. It's
well,
just
if you
so
ever watch it, I do have it on my channel. Yeah, if you ever do want to watch it, let me know, like, if you agree with the way he was using First John.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you send that link to me in Messenger? I would love
Uh,
to go check that out later.
yeah. Hang on a sec. Let me grab it for you. What was that? 2 years ago already? Wow.
Yeah, it's been a
Man,
long
time
time.
flies, man. Time flies. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Where's the time going? Before you know it, I'll be dead. Be an old idiot.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. One of the last times I talked to you,
Hmm.
I was I was only a I was only engaged, and now I am a husband in the Philippines. So
Yeah,
it's crazy how fast time goes by, and
it flies.
yeah,
It flies.
yeah,
My grandmother's been dead for like almost a year already, and it seems like just like a week ago. Like, it's crazy, dude. Just
yeah.
everything, just how fast things change, and the circumstances in life. It's like, wow. When the Bible talks about, like, we're just like a vapor. It's just
We
gone.
come and go, man.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah, that's why I always want to be thankful for the time God gives us. You know, to
Yeah, for
to
sure.
spend our time wisely.
Right. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm having a brain fart. Why can't I find the debate? It's on here. I know I have it. Okay. Is that it? Where? Yep, there it is. Okay, sorry about that. It took me a minute to find. Goodness gracious.
You're good, brother.
Wow. All right. Share. Copy link. Do you want me to give it to you in the private chat, or?
If you could send it in Messenger, that'd be better.
Okay. Let me see. Where are you?
I will say though, for your upcoming debate on compatibilism,
Yeah.
um, what approach are you trying to take to to criticize it? Are you trying to prove it's false? Are you trying to prove it's internally incoherent? Or
Um.
what approach are you trying to take?
So essentially, what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to take the position that it's an unnecessary philosophy. Because if I can just prove that there is one instance of anything that's not determined, then compatibilism isn't necessary. Um, and therefore it wouldn't be biblical if I could prove there's something in the Bible that wasn't determined. That's one aspect I was going to take at it. Um, Another aspect I was going to go with is there's numerous passages that seem to show that people have the sourcehood of their own actions or their choices. And so that was another aspect I was going to go at it. And I have a few verses where I was going to go over with that. And of course, 1 Corinthians 10:13, that God has provided a way out for every instance of temptation. And that can't be a legitimate way out if if it was determined you give into every instance that you give into.
Yeah.
Just a few things off the top of my head. But yeah, I have all those passages like written down.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah,
Just for some advice, and
yeah.
this isn't my bias, I promise. This is me just trying to help you prepare to, be ready for what you might come across in the debate. When it comes to the compatibilism thing,
Mhm.
you may want to try to prove that not indeterminism necessarily, but you might want to attack more closely on how is it possible for freedom and for something to be free and determined simultaneously, because that's the principle that's going to be in the back of Turretin fan's head
Well,
when he's
that's
going
what
to
he has to demonstrate, right? Like, because he's arguing for it,
That's true. I'm just
right?
saying, if you're going to try to give your own critique,
Yeah.
I would go that route for instead of trying to prove indeterminism, because he can come back and say, even if indeterminism is true, that doesn't substantiate incompatibilism, because you could still have compatibilism under a indeterministic framework.
And see, I don't know if you're here for that, but me and CJ actually discussed how that's just useless, and he actually kind of agreed with me. So
In a practical sense, I can agree, but in terms of
see,
a
because
conception,
there's a difference
it's
between
possible.
saying these things are possible versus this is how reality actually
How things
is.
are. Yeah, I
Exactly.
recognize that. All I'm saying is, when it comes to this issue, it is possible to think that determinism and freedom can coexist, even if you are not determined. To think that if it were to be the case, it would not
Well,
impact
John,
your
it's like
freedom. Either
arguing
way, you have
it's like
freedom.
arguing it's hypothetically possible that Logan from the Wolverine comics exists. It's another thing to argue that he actually is or does exist. You see what I'm saying? Like the one is useless. If you actually believe Logan exists, let's talk about that. I don't care about the hypothetical bullcrap. You know what I'm saying?
I get it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, for him, he could give a sufficient rejoinder by just saying,
Well, and I would
"Okay,
respond with what
indeterminism."
I just gave to you. Be
I
like,
know.
well,
I'm just
I
telling
don't
you,
care about
like, for
hypotheticals.
him, he would take that approach. In terms
I
of
mean,
the
and if
first,
he does, then I'll deal with it. I'll just point out
yeah,
how that's
I just want
useless.
to
Let's talk about
tell
what
you
actually
how
is.
he's going to approach that probably.
Sure.
But there's a paper by a mutual friend of ours, Colton Carlson. He
Yeah, no,
did a whole paper
I've
on
read,
Conspiracy
I
13.
think I read 15 pages of it. I haven't read the whole thing because it's so
Yeah, it's very
boring
lengthy.
to me. Yeah,
It's very lengthy, but
and he doesn't actually give his understanding of the verse. He just keeps talking about these multiple positions and like the different views of will, but he's not actually dealing with the passage itself.
yeah, and his primary reason for that is he's trying to deal with the objection against compatibilism more so than an understanding of the passage.
Yeah,
And
and
so
seeing that's what I'm
he
interested in. I want
clarifies
to hear how
others.
he understands it.
Yeah, he understands
Yeah.
it ministerially.
What
So
does that mean?
he takes it as this is ministerial comfort for a pastor to tell to one of his congregants under temptation, God is there with you, and God has given you a way of escape. It's not a metaphysical idea. It's that God is there with you, giving you a way of escape. You can trust Him to get
Okay.
out of it.
So the
And
problem with that understanding though, that if it's true that you every time you give into temptation has been determined, wouldn't that pastor be lying to the person to say God actually provided a way out for each instance?
well, because we don't know the content of God's decree,
Mm.
all we can do is say God has given us a way of escape, and
But
God's
right, you could say that, but you couldn't say for each instance though, because there are some instances he's determined you don't. Right, but the
there,
passage actually says for each instance.
right, and
Right.
so
That's the
he
problem.
would say that this is not meant to be understood
Okay.
as a metaphysical idea.
Okay.
It's
And do you
it's
agree
solely
with
a
that, or do you
comfort.
take a different view?
I think the context is largely ministerial.
Okay.
Um, the I don't think that there's any metaphysical connotation in this passage,
Okay.
but I will grant you that I do think that there needs more work to be done here
Mm.
in terms of what extent is this capacity. Is this merely God has given you a hypothetical uh, idea that if you were to have chosen differently, then you could have gone this way, or uh, what else can you go down there? So I do think there needs to be more work done personally,
Okay.
but I will agree with him in the respect that Paul's not thinking in metaphysical categories. He's
Okay.
long before all of those. And so I think it would be inappropriate for us to jam those things into the passage. And so I don't think it's wrong for a libertarian to go to this passage. I just think they should be careful on how far they take the passage, because I don't think it gets you all the way to the conclusion that they're trying to get to. So yeah, that's just my opinion.
Okay. And CJ, Kevin, we gotta debate sometime. Here's the thing. I wouldn't mind doing that, but I'm just letting you know that, like, in a debate, things are a little different. So, like, when we have casual conversation, it's like a little back and forth. It's more relaxed. But in a debate, because you're in the more of attack mode and you're focusing on responses and stuff, I feel like it's a different kind of atmosphere. It's a little bit more hostile, and I don't know if that's
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, I try to be friendly with
I
CJ. Yeah.
can you hear me, brother? Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I disconnected for a second. Sorry, but I understand that. I would love to see you guys debate personally, um, even if it's informal. Like I would even be willing to host it. Get you guys together and give you guys your time to
Oh,
talk,
okay.
like introductions and stuff like that, and
Okay.
then you guys could just have a very long cross ex. I
Sure.
mean, I think that would be a lot better in terms of fruitfulness, because there's more clash than there is monologue. But yeah, it's up to you guys. Whatever you guys want to do.
Well, if CJ wants to do that, I'm willing to do that. I just don't see. Usually, I when I debate people, it's people I don't really know, so it's like I don't feel guilty about being a little bit more harsh with them, and pressing the issue, and you know what I'm saying. Whereas, like, someone you're
Yeah.
friendly with, like, or you have, kind of, you're on good terms, like a relationship or whatever, it's like you kind of don't want to be so pushy, you know what I'm saying, and offend them. And it's like I have trouble doing that, right? Like, if I'm in debate mode, like, I'm on the attack. Like, no, I'm going to prove your position wrong. I'm going to push you into this corner, and I'm going to force you to deal with this or concede. Whereas when you more have a friendly discussion, it's more about asking, questions and trying to see where they're coming from. You know what I mean? It's a completely different type of atmosphere. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah.
I will say though, I do think there is a way you can do it though. I just
Okay.
still think it's possible, because with Charles, for example, he and I staunchly disagree on almost everything.
Yeah.
Like he's fully free grace, and I'm fully reformed. We're complete opposites there. But
I'm
he and
a
I have,
hybrid. I'm hybrid.
yeah,
I have a lot
and
of agreement with free grace, but I have some agreement with lordship too.
yeah, and so for me, um, although I have staunch disagreements with him, he and I are able to have academic, serious engagement together, and never really um, sacrifice that friendship I have with him. And so, yeah, that can definitely be done. Like CJ just said, uh, it shouldn't sacrifice friendship, but at the same time, it's good to sharpen each other. It's a really good tool that can definitely be used for that purpose.
Well, I'm willing to give it a shot, CJ, and I apologize ahead of time if I get a little pushy or something. But yeah,
Believe me, brother, pushy is not a problem. It's when it comes across as arrogance uh, that can become a problem in terms of a friendship. But being pushy isn't bad. You and I have had a lot of uh, pushy push. We've pushed each other hard in the past, and I appreciate that from you. That's one thing I appreciate about you. You won't allow me to be inconsistent, and that's one thing I love about Charles as well, because he does the same
yeah,
thing. So that's not a
yeah.
bad thing. It's a good thing.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I will go ahead and let you finish what you were planning to do.
Okay.
I have stuff I need to finish, and I only have a few hours. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no doubt, man. Well, thanks for stopping by, John.
of course, man. God bless you, brother,
All right
and
now.
talk to you soon, brother.
You got it. Peace. All right. Um. Oh, I have to use the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back. I have to just go number one, not number two. So I'll be right back, and then I'm gonna read a little bit of that book. So be patient, guys. I'll be right back. Thank you for waiting. All right. What on earth? What happened to my? There it is. Sorry. am back. Sorry about that. Thanks for your patience, guys. Let me share the screen here. All right. Here we are. Now, is that big enough? Can you guys clearly see that? Can someone let me know in the chat if that's good enough where you could actually read it? I think I can make it a little bigger. Hold on a sec. Oh, that's too big. How's that? Good. You can see it, Glenn? All right. So this is The Allure of Incompatibilism, and I can't pronounce the author's name. So the consequence argument. This chapter is devoted to the consequence argument. As we noted, the consequence argument attempts to show that determinism and moral responsibility are not friendly partners, indirectly by establishing the incompatibility of determinism with something else, the freedom to do otherwise. That is allegedly required for free action and moral responsibility. The argument could not have done otherwise means that the agent is not able at a time to render false or true proposition regarding what he or she does at the time. So for instance, if for some reason I cannot now render it false that I now stop writing, then I cannot do other than write. On one of its constructions, the principal burden of the consequence argument is to establish that it is indeed the case that if determinism is true, no agent is ever able to render false any true proposition concerning what he or she does at any time. Okay, the logical modalities. To formulate and understand the consequence argument, a slight digression on the logical modalities such as necessity, contingency, impossibility, and possibility will be valuable. Of special concern to us is that these modalities can be predicated on truth values of propositions. Every proposition has a truth value. According to classical logic, there are just two truth values, truth and falsehood. So assuming classical logic, each position is either true or false. A true contingent proposition can instead be false, and a false one can instead be true. Necessarily true propositions cannot be false, and false ones cannot be true. The concepts of a propositions being contingent on a propositions being necessarily true and a propositions being necessarily false can be understood in terms of the notion of a possible world. I assume that a possible world is an abstract entity, a conjunction of propositions which is maximal or suitable complete or subtly complete, and which does not imply a contradiction. A proposition P is maximal or sustainably complete if and only if for any proposition Q, either P entails Q or P entails the negation of Q, but not both. Assume in addition that a possible world is itself a proposition. We may very roughly explicit the notion of a possible world in this way. Start with the history of the real actual world. True propositions expressing all the facts of the world, past, present, and future, comprise its history. Now imagine some change in this history. Imagine next all the other changes that would be required in order to accommodate this initial change into an eternal coherent story. The result is the history or description expressed by a large conjunction of propositions of some other possible world. So long as the history is internally consistent and complete, it may not be taken to the history of a possible world. Redefining the motion of a contingent proposition. A proposition is contingent if and only if it is true in at least one possible world and is false in at least one possible world. So would this get into middle knowledge, essentially, like the Molinism thing, where there's different possible outcomes, and God has a um, plan for each outcome, essentially. Let's see. Stefan is a cheery person, and that Calgary is in Alberta are contingent propositions. These propositions are both possibly true and possibly false. Okay. A proposition is necessarily true if and only if it is true in all possible worlds. So a proposition is necessarily true if and only if it is true in all possible worlds. Okay. So something is only necessarily true if it's always true no matter what, like in any alternative world, I guess. Okay. Um, the proposition that if something is red, then it is colored, and the proposition. Uh, okay. True. So if something is red, it is colored. So that's what necessarily true, right? Yeah. Some people have denied that every proposition has a truth value. So, for instance, Aristotle argues that some propositions, so-called future contingent propositions, are neither true nor false. For example, the proposition that L will fight a sea battle tomorrow, a proposition that is contingent in future relative to now, or that the stars will shine tomorrow are examples of such propositions. Standard logic implies that either it is true that L will fight a sea battle tomorrow, or it is false that L fight a sea battle tomorrow. There are different propositions on the ontological status of possible worlds. According to the conceptualist proposition, possible worlds are mental constructions. For example, complexes of concepts. See, for instance, register. Okay. Um, on the combinatorial position, the actual world is the set or collection of everything there is, and other possible worlds consist of all other possible combinations of the basic entities that exist in the actual world. Okay, according to the abstract worlds position, which I favor, okay, a possible world is an abstract entity in a very large conjunction of propositions, a conjunction that is maximal or suitably complete and which does not imply a contradiction. This view is associated with whatever. Um, on the concrete world position, a possible world is a concrete entity. For example, a causally isolated collection of concrete things. Okay. If some person is a bachelor, then that person is male or necessarily true. Are necessarily true. Okay, right. A proposition is necessarily false or impossible if and only if it is false in all possible worlds. There are no worlds in which that is true. The proposition that some squares or that some square have 5 sides and the proposition that 2 plus 2 equals 5 are necessarily false, right? Contingent and necessarily true propositions are possible or possibly true. There is at least one possible world in which they are true. Contingent and necessarily false propositions are possibly false. There is at least one world in which they are false. Each necessarily true position and each necessarily false proposition is a non-contingent proposition. Interesting. Peters Van Ingen's version of the consequence argument. Okay. So are they going to break it down? Are they going to simplify it? Let's see. To secure the conclusion that no agent is able to render false any true proposition concerning what she does at any time, Van Ingen introduces 2 rules of inference. Let square represent logic, necessity, truth in all possible worlds. Okay. Wow. So this is going to get confusing. So Q symbolize if P then Q. So this symbolizes if P then Q. Okay. And MP abrasive. Okay. Proposition P is true. And person A at a time T is powerless to render P false. For simplicity in future occurrences of this operator, the indexing to persons and times will be assumed but suppressed. The rules can be expressed in this way. Rule A. Yeah. Okay. So square P plus NP. And the NP was the proposition that P is true in a person. Wow. This is getting really confusing. Oh man. Okay. And I really wish they would simplify this. May affirm from a position being necessarily true that each person is powerless to render it false. No person can render false the proposition that all men are mortal. Well, okay, yes, that's true. That's never been well. Jesus, well. Then again, even Jesus died, but he rose again. Okay. Um, yeah, okay. So all men are mortal. Sure. Okay. Wow. Look at this. Look at this equation. Jeez. This rule says roughly that if P and one is powerless to render P false, and if P this thing plus and Q one is powerless to render this conditional, if P then Q false, then one is powerless to render Q false. Wow. Yeah, this is okay. One is powerless over this thing's rendering to a second, then one is powerless over the second. Okay. So if one is powerless over one thing and one is powerless over this thing's leading to a second, then one is powerless over the second. Okay. Powerlessness transfers through logical implication. For example, if you are powerless over your being 6 feet tall, and you are powerless over it being the case that you are 6 feet tall, then you are at least 5 feet tall, and you are powerless over you being at least 5 feet tall. Sure, right? In addition to relying on rule A and rule B, or beta, the consequence argument also appeals to two premises. The first, the principle of the 50 of the past says, or the fixity of the past says that the past is fixed. One is powerless to render false any truth about the past. The second, the principle of the fixity of the laws, says that no one can so act as to violate the law of nature. One is powerless to render false any true proposition that expresses a law of nature. Assuming the truth of determinism, the consequence argument proceeds to show that no person can do otherwise. No person can render false a true proposition concerning what she does at any time. Recall, if determinism is true, then at any instant, the complete state of the universe at that instant and the laws of nature entail that at that instant there is exactly one physically possible future. Let past stand for a proposition expressing the complete state of the universe at the time when no human being existed. Laws stand for propositions express the laws of nature, and action now stand for any true proposition about the state of the world now. Then from the assumption that determinism is true, it follows that past laws, and then this action now. Okay. To elaborate, suppose action now is identical to the true proposition that Ish writes on April 3rd, 2007. Assuming determinism, we may infer P. Necessarily, if the past and laws are what they are, then Ish writes on April 3rd, 2007. Since a necessary truth obtains independently of what anybody does or fails to do, an application of rule A to P yields NP. That is, it yields. If the past and the laws are what they are, then Ish writes on April 3rd, 2007, and Ish is powerless to render false this conditional fact. Right, okay. I think I follow. The fixity of the past implies that Ish cannot now render false any true proposition about the past, and the fixity of the laws implies that Ish can now render false any true proposition that states a law of nature. We may put the point in this way. The past and the laws are what they are, and Ish is powerless to render false this conjunctive fact. An application of rule beta to 1 and 2 yields the conclusion. Ish writes on April 3rd, 2007, and Ish is powerless to render this false. In other words, if determinism is true, then we may conclude from 1 and 2 and rule beta that Ish cannot do other than write on April 3rd, 2007, somewhat more rigorously. What we may dub the original consequence argument may be formulated as follows. Wow. The thesis of determinism is true. Past and laws, action now. Past and laws, action now. Past laws, action now. Yeah. Assumption from 1, from to 2 by logic, from 3 rule A. Assumption past is fixed, 4 and 5 in beta. See, this confuses the life out of me. This thing here. Yeah. Wow. I wonder if maybe if I use ChatGPT, maybe they could break it down better for me. The consequence argument. Let me try that. Let me see if ChatGPT can simplify that. Let's see, ChatGPT. Yep. Please explain it. Yep. It in simple terms. Okay. So let me stop sharing this for a second. All right. Let's go to ChatGPT. Here we go. So ChatGPT. Okay. The consequence argument is one of the most famous arguments against compatibilism. The idea that free will and determinism can both be true. It basically says, yeah, I know it. Yep. Yeah. All right. Step-by-step simple terms here. If everything you do is inevitable consequence of things you had no control over, then you have no real control over what you do. Okay. Right. Okay. So step-by-step simple terms. Determinism says everything that happens, including what you think, decide, and do, is fixed by the laws of nature and events in the past. You cannot change the past, what happens before you were born, right? You can't change the laws of nature, gravity, chemistry. Yep, got it. If your choices are the result of the past plus the laws of nature, and you can't change either of those, and then you can't change what you choose. If you can't change what you choose, you're not truly free in the libertarian sense. Simple analogy. Imagine you're reading the last chapter of a book that's already written. The past equals earlier chapters, the laws of nature, the rules of grammar, and the storytelling. If those are fixed, the end was set long before you got to it. Your choices are just part of the pre-written ending. You can't alter them. Right. And then, so therefore, free will doesn't exist. Okay. I think I get it. The consequence argument isn't saying that you can't act or decide. It's saying that under determinism, all your acts and decisions were already inevitable because of things you had no control over or never had control over. Short philosophical version of the argument. Sure. Yeah, but I don't want it to be complicated. Here's the philosophical version. Okay. If determinism true is every fact, the future necessary consequence of laws of nature and the state. Yeah. If no one has power over X, see that's what confuses me when they start bringing X, P, Q, S, Y. See, I much prefer this here. This is so much simpler to understand. This versus, see, this over X necessarily Y, but it's like, whoa, that's when you start to lose me. I start like, what's going on here? Yeah, so why compatibilists disagree? Compatibilists will often challenge premise 3. They'll argue that even if the past and the laws are fixed, you can still have control in a different sense. Right, so but not in any meaningful sense. What sense is there control then? Or they'll redefine free will so that it doesn't require the ability to do otherwise, opting for a conditional ability view. Hmm. Hmm. All right. Common compatibilist responses. Redefining free will, conditional ability. What they say. All right, so here we go. What's going on in that side chat? P in the world number 1, I am 888. P, what are you talking about? I have no idea. What's up, Bob? Hope all is well. Okay. So now ChatGPT is going to give how Calvinists respond to this argument. They'll say, even if determinism is true, you still act freely when your actions flow from your own desires, beliefs, and reasoning, even if those desires are themselves determined. You could have done otherwise if you had wanted or decided to do otherwise. Yeah, but you couldn't actually do otherwise because your choices were determined. So how is that getting out of the problem? If I choose to drink coffee instead of tea, that's free because it's what I want, even though determinism says my wants were fixed by prior causes. Right, but it's still determined. So if something's see, this is where man, this is so circular. This is circular because if we define freedom as a genuine, let's see. So if I am the sourcehood of my choices, I would argue that's genuine freedom. But if all of my choices are predetermined by something else, I don't have genuine freedom. So therefore there would be no compatibilism because there's no genuine freedom. It's just determined. Right? So they have to play games with what it means to be free. Right. Yep, see? It changes the meaning of free will to something weaker than most people mean by it. Yep. 2, rejecting the transfer of powerlessness principle. What they say. Just because you have no control over the past or the laws doesn't mean you have no control over what follows. Okay. Example. A chess move may follow inevitably from the rules in earlier moves, but that doesn't mean the player didn't make it intentionally. Okay. But, well, the problem with that is that the prior move of your opponent, right, how they move their piece on the chessboard, doesn't necessitate how you move your chess piece. right? You could choose to move a pawn, you could choose to move a rook or a knight or a bishop. Just because they move a particular piece onto a certain square doesn't determine that you move in a certain way. There's other factors that go into play. There's inexperienced chess players that aren't familiar with the game and they make a bad move. And there's people that are better and they understand things or they're thinking 3 steps ahead. There's a lot that goes into that. So just because someone moves their king or their queen in a certain way doesn't determine how the person moves their piece. There's other factors that go into that. Yeah. Okay, so that's the chess piece analogy. Criticism. The analogy can fail because in determinism, your decision-making process itself is part of the inevitable chain from the past plus the laws. Unlike a chessboard, where you are an actual agent. Yep. Denying the consequence argument's scope. What the compatibilists will say. The argument confuses causal determinism with coercion. Just because something is determined doesn't mean you're forced against your will. Freedom equals acting according to your own will. Well, the Calvinists would say your nature, or uh, acting in accordance with the eternal decree of God, right? Um, Freedom equals acting according to your own will without external compulsion. Criticism. This avoids the metaphysical problem by focusing on psychological freedom, but it sidesteps whether you truly could have done otherwise. Yep. Redefines freedom. Yeah. Allows for determinism and responsibility, ignores deeper metaphysical freedom question. Yep. Okay. If you want, I could walk through a short story example showing how an incompatibilist uses the consequences arguments against a compatibilist. Sure, why not? All right. Here's a short story example that shows how an incompatibilist uses the consequence argument against a compatibilist in everyday terms. The story. Sam and Dominoes. Imagine you walk into a room and see a long line of dominoes falling. You watch one domino tip the next and the next, all the way to the end. Now, replace the dominoes with events in your life. Domino number 1, the state of the universe, billions of years. Well, I'm a young earth creationist, so I'd reject that premise. That's garbage. Domino 2, the laws of nature. Domino 3, every cause and effect leading up to the present moment. Domino final, you deciding to have coffee instead of tea this morning. The incompatibilist says, if determinism is true, the first domino, past plus laws, guarantee your coffee choice, just like the chain of falling dominoes. You had no control over the first domino, so you had no control over the last either, even though you felt like you were choosing. The compatibilist will reply, sure, the first domino determined my choice, but the choice still came from me, my own desire, my reasoning. If I had wanted tea, I would have chosen tea. That's enough for freedom. Okay. The incompatibilist pushes back. But your wanting tea or coffee is just another domino in the chain. You didn't control the cause that shaped your wants. They were determined by the past and the laws before you were born. The standoff. Compatibilist freedom equals acting according to your own internal desires, even if those desires are determined. So not free. Incompatibilist, real freedom, having the genuine ability to choose otherwise, which determinism removes. Right. I think you could also get into like sourcehood, right? Because I think sourcehood would also deny like the whole domino effect thing determining. You know what I'm saying? Um, if you want, I can give you a Bible-based example that parallels this disagreement. For instance, how Calvinists and Arminians, often incompatibilists, might each use Pharaoh narrative Exodus. Oh, sure, yeah, why not? Yeah, go for it. All right, let's take Pharaoh's story in Exodus and use it as a biblical example of the compatibilist versus incompatibilist disagreement in the consequence argument. The story, Pharaoh's heart in Exodus. God tells Moses, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Yep, Exodus 4:21, 7:3. Pharaoh also hardens his own heart in other verses, Exodus 8:15, Exodus 8:32. The outcome, Pharaoh refuses to let Israel go, is exactly what God said would happen. How the two sides see it. Yep, compatibilist, so the Calvinist view. God's sovereign plan determines both Pharaoh's decisions and the events leading to it. Right. So when Calvinists go, "Oh, I don't believe God determines people's intentions and decisions," well, how are you a compatibilist? Like I, I don't like the games. I appreciate people that are upfront and honest, like how CJ was earlier when he came on. When we were talking about Joseph and his brothers selling him into slavery in Genesis, he admitted, like, yeah, God determined their desires to sell Joseph. It's like, well, thanks for being honest about that, because that's exactly what Calvin said. God moves on the hearts of men to do whatever he wills, whether to good for their mercy's sake or whether to evil according to their merits. John Calvin said that. Pharaoh freely chose to resist because he acts according to his own desires, even though those desires were determined by God's plan. See, but that again, they'd have to prove that premise. They'd have to prove that God determined Pharaoh's desires. The fact that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, okay, so this is where they go for proof, right? But I would disagree. But anyway, the fact that God hardened Pharaoh's heart and Pharaoh hardened his own heart is proof that divine sovereignty and human responsibility can coexist. Right, but that would be ignoring the fact that Pharaoh's heart was already hard before God hardened it. Right, so it's not like God hardened Pharaoh and then Pharaoh became more hard, so he hardened it in response. Like, no, it was already hard, and God just furthered the process to get something done and over with. Anyway, incompatibilists, often Arminians or free will theist view. Free will theist? A free will theist? What on earth is a. Wow, okay. Not even necessarily Christian on that. Great. God foreknew Pharaoh would freely harden his own heart, and God permitted that choice. Harden means to confirm Pharaoh in a rebellious direction he had already chosen. Right, that's what I believe. Not cause the initial rebellion. Yep. If determinism were true, Pharaoh's resistance was unavoidable, and the consequence argument says unavoidable actions aren't free in the libertarian sense. Yeah. Consequence arguments in this context, God plus past decree determined, yep, Pharaoh's hardened heart. Pharaoh had no control over God's eternal decree or the past. If determinism is true, Pharaoh could not have done otherwise. Therefore, if determinism is true, Pharaoh did not have libertarian free will. Summary of disagreement. Compatibilist. Pharaoh is still responsible because he acted according to his own desires, even if those desires were part of God's determined plan. Incompatibilist. Pharaoh's responsibility only makes sense if he generally could have chosen otherwise, which determinism removes. Yep. If you like, I could also show how Romans 9 gets pulled. Oh, yeah, Romans 9. No, that won't be necessary. I've been over Romans 9 so many times. Yeah, but that's interesting. So maybe I should just went with Chat GPT the whole time instead of trying to read the argument from that book where it gets complicated. I could have just had Chat GPT break it down for me. But anyway, I've been going for over 3 hours, almost 4 hours actually. I think that's good enough for now. I will probably follow up with more debate prep videos, probably part 2 and a part 3. But yeah, thanks for everyone that's been here, that's tuned in. I appreciate your support. Please don't forget to leave a like. Oh, is someone backstage? Sorry about that. Oh, Bob, what's going on, Bob? I didn't see you there. Sorry.
I just thought I'd come in and ask for a link to that PDF, that paper you're reading there. Just curious. If you can, if you can't, it's okay. Or there's quite a few papers online, so I don't know which particular one you're using.
Well, here's Bob. If you give me your, I can send it to you over Google Drive.
Oh yeah. Have you got my email address? I'll type it in the private chat
Okay.
if you want.
Sure.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it, Kevin.
Yeah. I can send it to you on Google Drive.
Sorry to trouble you.
No, it's all right, man.
Oh, by the way, that debate you had with Smokey.
Yeah.
I mean, the title to that one was a fallacy anyway, calling you that.
What is faith a good work?
He said you're a skittlehead or something.
Oh man, listen. So
Yeah, I know it's childish and I know it's trivial, but it is a fallacy, one way or the other. Ridiculous.
Well, what happened was originally it wasn't going to be a discussion. I guess he was going to be reviewing the video I put out, calling him and Dave out for turning faith into a good work. I showed up in his side chat because he accused me of being a coward that wouldn't come talk to him. So I was
Oh
in the
no,
side
I
chat
would
like,
never
"Where's the
think
link?"
that of you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would never think that of you, Kevin. You know, coward. That's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll send you to that. I'll send that to you on Google Drive. I'll do it right now, as a matter of fact.
Well, yeah, you could do it right now because you've got to get to sleep, haven't you? It must be about
3 o'clock.
2 o'clock in the morning there or something.
3 o'clock.
3, right? You're 5 hours behind.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
See you, Bob. I'll send that over to you right now. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
You got it, man. No problem. All right, guys. Well, with that, that's going to be the end of tonight's show. Please don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the stream. And I'm not sure when I'll be doing a follow-up or part 2 or whatever, but I'm sure I will. But yeah, until next time, God bless, and I'll catch you later.